Chapter 346. Your Highness. The strange title sounded like something that could only be heard in ancient stories. She tried her best to turn her eyes and look to the side. She saw a gray-haired man enter her field of vision, and there were a few women standing beside him. "How do you feel?" he asked in a low voice. She did not answer, but asked, "Where am I?" "Border town, west of the kingdom of Greycastle." Great, things were developing in the direction that she did not want to see the most. Unknown place, unknown time, unknown people. She wanted to turn over and get out of bed, but found that she could not muster any strength. "I am the fourth prince of the kingdom of Greycastle, lord of Border Town, Roland Wimbledon," he said again. "These are members of the witch union. Do you remember anything?" "Witch union?" She frowned. "They are witches." Although she did not know what kind of new organization it was, at least they were of the same kind. But why did they look like subordinates of this man? "Wait, Prince." She recalled for a while and could not help but be stunned. Isn't this the name of the secular regime during the first battle of Divine Will more than 400 years ago? Did I return to the time before the war? Did God give me a second chance and let me prepare in advance to save the holy city and its people? No, calm down, she told herself. This kind of unreasonable thing only happens in fictional taverns. Right, what did I encounter in the end? In the basement of the laboratory building, a group of mad demons rushed in. She released all her magic power to build the strongest ice barrier. The Stone of Echo kept sending out distress signals, waiting for the day when they returned to the fertile plains and found her again. "Did you save me?" Yes, now that she had escaped from the ice barrier, the only possibility was that the army of witches had returned. "Have the demons retreated? Have we won? What about the holy city of Tequila?" After blurting out this series of questions, she saw the faces of the witches change. They looked at each other with joy and excitement. A mature-looking witch with long reddish-brown hair could not help but ask, "We did find you in the basement of a stone tower. Are you really from 450 years ago?" The person who asked the question reminded her of the blessed warrior who turned the tide. That person's hair was the same, like a flame that illuminated one's heart. Compared to the gray-haired man, she was more willing to answer the witch's question. Although she usually didn't care about her status, being stared at by a lowly person always made her feel offended. If it was someone else, this man would most likely be severely punished. "My name is Agatha, a witch of the Tequila Quest Society." She paused. "What do you mean by 450 years ago? Have you been fighting with the demons for more than 400 years? This is impossible. You've slept for too long. Things might be a little different from what you think." The man who called himself Roland said, "If you feel that your body is fine, we can slowly tell you. Speak." Agatha closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Although this prince behaved very rudely, she did not have the time to care about this. As he began to explain the history of Greycastle and the evolution of the continent's 4 kingdoms, she felt cold sweat gradually appear on her back. In his narration, Agatha quickly found a few corresponding signs, such as the concealing forest and the impassable mountain range. However, when she put these signs into her memory, the conclusion she came up with shocked her. If the names of the places matched, the so-called 4 kingdoms were nothing more than the former barbarian land, a narrow strip between the mountains and the sea. In their eyes, it was a barren land with no development value. And the barbarian land he mentioned turned out to be the fertile plains that she was familiar with. As for the holy city of Tequila, it had long become an unknown area. With the passage of time, it was buried in the depths of the fertile plains. How ridiculous was this? However, the more ridiculous thing was yet to come. Buried together with Tequila was the status of witches. According to him, witches had unexpectedly become the target of everyone's humiliation. In the 4 kingdoms, the political power was firmly controlled by ordinary people. They called themselves kings and nobles, which was completely the same old thing from before the first battle of Divine Will. However, it was this group of old antiques that had become the rulers who stepped on the witches' heads. How could this be possible? Presumptuous. She could not help but interrupt. Witches were actually hunted by ordinary people. Who would have the courage to do so? In anger, Agatha forced herself to stretch out her hand, wanting to teach this man a lesson for talking nonsense. However, she did not expect that her magic power could not turn into frost and gush out as usual. At this time, she felt that there was a metal ring on her ankle. She lifted the quilt and saw that the stone embedded in it was a god's stone of retaliation. Are you crazy? She looked at the group of witches in disbelief. You actually helped an ordinary person to deal with a high awakened, and you violated the Union's prohibition by using God's stone of retaliation without authorization. Only the Union's law enforcement team was allowed to use God's stones. In addition, anyone who carried, sold, modified, or destroyed God's stones would be severely punished, or even sentenced to death. The prince sighed. This is what I'm worried about. Don't worry, I'll talk to her. The red-haired witch sat on the bed and covered her with the quilt again. My name is Vendi. Things are not what you think, and what he said is the truth. I don't know what the holy city you lived in 450 years ago was like, but today, Tequila no longer exists, and the Union you mentioned has never been heard of. We have been living in hiding until we met His Highness Roland. He gave us a stable place to live and encouraged us to use our abilities. At the same time, we studied how to better use our abilities to change the world. Here, we can live freely like ordinary people. We don't need to hide, and we don't need to worry about being hunted down and killed by the church or the people. You know, nowadays, God's stones of retaliation are everywhere. After a witch loses her ability, she is not much stronger than an ordinary person. After listening to Vendi's story, Agatha was completely silent. The Union was a huge organization led by several witch kingdoms. It had many high witches and extraordinaries. In order to win the battle of divine will and unite their power, the Union formed an extremely large army. They also controlled every holy city and were responsible for training and dispatching witches, dealing with disputes, and maintaining the stability and order of the city. Only they had the power to arrest and put a witch on trial. However, such a powerful organization, no one had heard of their reputation. What about the fugitives who wanted to restore order? Where were they now? To be continued. Please pay attention. Chapter 347. How is it? Roland put down the pen in his hand and looked up at Nightingale, who had quietly appeared in the office. She's asleep. She just ate a bowl of oatmeal and her appetite is pretty good. Nightingale walked to the table and sat back in her usual position. Now it's Sylvie's turn to monitor her. Well, that's good. Do you believe what she said? Nightingale asked. In any case, the god's stone of retaliation has been removed. When you ask her tomorrow, you can tell whether she's lying or not. But... Roland paused for a moment. I think most of what she said is true. Why? Nightingale asked curiously. Have you ever discovered that a person from 400 years ago and we used the same script and language? The prince said, holding his chin. It's reasonable to say that the two regions are separated by the impassable mountain range, so it's almost impossible for such a situation to occur, unless the two regions originally came from the same source and were very close to each other. But she called the four kingdoms the barbarian land. That's the key. I don't know what it was like here more than 400 years ago. Maybe it was just a few scattered villages and some criminals who were exiled by the witch world. The kingdom's history books also recorded that the major cities were generally established between 200 and 300 years ago. Moreover, astrologers appeared in that era. He said with great interest, I've always been very curious why astrologers, who generally didn't have any achievements or research results, could be called sages together with alchemists. Now I roughly understand. The Union led the survivors to escape to this peripheral area, and at the same time, brought their language and civilization with them. These people blended into the local people and helped them establish the regime, the fortress, and the city. You said it as if you saw it with your own eyes. Nightingale smiled and shook her head. This is the only way to explain why we used the same language as her, Roland said seriously. Because we originally came from the same source. And during these 400 years, the civilization has always been in the process of reconstruction, without the slightest development. Well, she said, spreading out her hands. Anyway, we'll know the answer tomorrow. If you guess wrong, you'll have to give me a luxurious lunch. The so-called luxurious lunch was actually a combination of corn soup, roasted chicken legs, and ice cream bread, which the kitchen only made once a week. What if you guess wrong? You can have anything you want, Nightingale said, tilting her head and squinting her eyes. Her cheeks and smooth neck formed a perfect curve, making her look exceptionally attractive. If one's appearance was full marks, no matter what she did, she would be tempting others. Now Roland finally verified the truth of this saying. I've noted it down. He coughed twice and turned his attention back to the paper. Since Agatha had just woken up, Roland could not force her to answer all his questions accurately and carefully. Basically, he followed her train of thought and asked her questions wherever she thought, so the information he got was very confusing. What he was doing now was to rearrange the information in Agatha's words and find out the key points that he needed to understand next. There was no doubt that the most pressing problem was the demons. In the end, the reason for the war with the devils, and why they were now ceasing to fight, this information was crucial to Border Town. There had never been a war without a reason, and what the demons did not seem to be an invasion for resources and expansion. They did not occupy the barbarian land, nor did they abduct humans. It looked like an act of killing. Roland also noticed that Agatha mentioned the Battle of Divine Will. Did the two sides start a life-and-death war at the behest of God? But at that time, there was not even a shadow of the church, so naturally there was also the one God that they claimed to be. He could not be at ease if he did not get an explanation for this. At the same time, he needed to figure out the food, clothing, housing, and transportation of the Holy City civilization as soon as possible, or rather, what was the status of their economic foundation. These details could help him measure the level of development of the civilization and indirectly determine the strength of the demons. As for the Union, Roland did not care too much about it. The scarcity of witches and the instability of their abilities had already determined that the combatability of this organization would not be very high. Historical experience had repeatedly emphasized that before the formation of a generational gap, a full-scale war was a battle of attrition. Scarce high-precision weapons could not make up for the overall disadvantage. The second point was the magic stones. According to Tilly, the magical characteristics of the magic stones could greatly make up for the weakness of the unstable ability, allowing witches to exert power that did not belong to them, and allowing assistant witches to also go to the battlefield, although in Roland's eyes, this was completely putting the cart before the horse. He could not wait to turn all combat witches into assistant witches and throw them into endless production work. However, the strange thing was that the Union, which had many witches, did not use this method to fight against the demons. Instead, it chose to create the God's Punishment Army, which was really incredible. Could it be that the magic stones had some unknown shortcomings, or that they were extremely difficult to produce? Fortunately, Agatha was a member of the Quest Society, which was similar to the current alchemy workshop. It gathered a group of extremely talented witches and specialized in the research of magic stones and magic power. Roland faintly felt that there should be a lot of potential in it. The last question was about the church. He drew a circle on this column. Obviously, he could not get an answer from Agatha about the establishment and development of this organization. What he could infer from the few words was that the church was established after the witches were defeated. They obtained the secrets of the Union and covered up everything about the witches, rendering them as the incarnation of the demons. If the people of the Four Kingdoms were regarded as the descendants of the indigenous people, then the church was a veritable outsider. Moreover, the indigenous people had no civilization to speak of, so it was not surprising that they were deceived by fabricated history and oracle. All this was just because the witches used to oppress the ordinary people, so the refugees who escaped saw the witches as enemies and even hunted witches on this continent. Roland frowned. It sounded reasonable, but he felt that something was wrong. There were many blessed warriors and extraordinaries in the Union, and even transcendents. Even if they had God's stones of retaliation, it was impossible for them to defeat such an opponent, right? To completely wipe out a force that was much stronger than oneself, hatred alone could not do it. Obviously, the information was missing a key piece of information. That witch doesn't seem to like you very much, Nightingale suddenly said. After all, she lives in a world where all witches are superior to others. Roland laughed. In her eyes, I'm afraid I'm no different from the weeds on the roadside. You don't hate her. Why should I? She's just a poor person who has been abandoned by the times. He shook his head. After sleeping in an ice coffin for more than 400 years, she woke up to find that the world was completely different. The fear brought by this feeling of strangeness will definitely make her build a mental wall to defend herself. Once she accepts all of this, she should slowly change her mind. Sure enough, it's like your answer, Nightingale said with a smile. Don't worry, I won't let her offend you in the slightest. Chapter 348. Well, is this a higher awakening? The prince asked. Agatha did not know what to say for a moment. There was only one thought left in her mind: how could this be? The holy city had been forgotten, and the Union had been destroyed. It was reasonable to say that without specialized training and guidance, the witch's abilities should have greatly declined. But what did she see now? A witch who had just reached adulthood had already achieved 2 promotions. This was not something that could be described as good luck. Even in the Union, where many geniuses gathered, there were only a few witches like this. And, if she heard it right, there were 3 other witches like Anna. Agatha stared blankly at the gray-haired man, and it took her a while to recover. This should be, but I don't have the stone of measuring, so I can't test the extent of the ability change. She paused, and her throat was a little dry. I want to ask, what did Anna experience when she awakened? She seemed to have just reached adulthood. Did these 2 changes happen in just 1 or 2 years? After finishing her words, Agatha realized that she had unconsciously used honorifics, witches could not inherit. Even if a large number of ordinary people were gathered around them, there was no guarantee that a powerful witch would be born. Therefore, the seniority was always determined by ability rather than family background. According to Anna's current ability, she already had the qualifications to enter the senior management of the Union. Compared to herself, even if she was not a superior, she was at least an equal figure. Any higher awakened was worthy of respect. The first time was because her magic power was exhausted while fighting against demonic beasts. The second time, I think, should be caused by learning knowledge. Knowledge. She was startled. What kind of knowledge? Ahem, we can talk about this later. The prince cleared his throat. Now let's go back to the topic we were talking about. What does Alice's God's Punishment Army experiment mean? Yes, if he did not lie to me, this knowledge must contain a very great truth, so that Anna could awaken a new ability through an epiphany. It was very normal that he did not want to explain in detail before gaining her trust. Agatha could not help but feel excited. Improving the probability of promotion was of extraordinary significance to witches. If they could figure out the principle, it would not be difficult to revive the Union. However, where did he get this knowledge from? This was a backward wilderness. How could a few villagers understand the mysteries of magic power? She was filled with confusion. What had the world become in the past 400 years? Agatha temporarily put these difficult questions aside. Alice is extremely powerful. After wearing the God's Stone of Retaliation, she won't be at a disadvantage even when facing several lords of hell. However, there were too few who were above the transcendent level. In other words, we lost because of the diversity of our abilities. Diversity? That's right. Before a witch awakens, no one knows what kind of ability she will have. But according to the statistics of the Union, only 10% of the witches are suitable for fighting. The same ratio applies to the extraordinary. Among this group of combat witches, it was unknown how many of them would be promoted. The Union once encountered an embarrassing situation where there was not a single promoted person for 50 years, so the fighting ability of the witches is very unstable. Mortals may not necessarily awaken may not necessarily be able to fight, and fighting may not necessarily make them stronger. Is this what you mean? The prince touched his chin and said. Something like that. Agatha sighed. So we set up a guard of mortals to make up for the lack of witches, but mortals can't defeat the demons. Even if they were given God's stones of retaliation, they were far from enough to compete with the powerful mad demons. Under such a disadvantageous situation, Alice ordered the Quest Society to start researching warriors who could break through the limits of the human body. From this scribbled note, it seems that she succeeded. Seems? The prince asked curiously. Didn't you say you were a member of the Quest Society? Indeed. But after this order was issued, I left the Tequila Quest Society and built my own laboratory building in the misty forest. She bit her lip and hesitated for a moment before continuing. They soon found the direction and used the power of the God's Stone of Retaliation to forcibly combine witches and mortals, but this process consumed the witches' lives. I couldn't accept this kind of experiment. The Quest Society should focus on exploring the use of the God's Stone, instead of treating witches as consumables. Natalia was right, this kind of behavior would only bring destruction to witches. The prince looked a little shocked. Treating people as consumables? Alice had no choice. At that time, Tequila was on the brink of destruction. Agatha suddenly felt a little more pleasing to the eye when she saw Alice's sympathetic expression. But now that the Union has disappeared, it's obvious that this thing didn't survive and it probably won't appear again in the future. She lowered her head and stroked the pages of the book. Over the mountains, across the rivers. What a familiar slogan. But where are you now? How can I rebuild the order alone? But the God's Punishment Army still exists. This sentence made Agatha's fingers suddenly freeze. She looked at the prince in disbelief. What did you say? I don't know if this is a coincidence. The prince spoke very slowly, as if he was considering his words. The church is an organization that you have never heard of. In the middle of the impassable mountain range, there are two cities, and both of them are called holy cities. The witch-hunting operation was initiated by them. Not only that, they are also searching for orphans and street children, and bringing them back to the monastery in the holy cities for adoption. Vendi was one of them who escaped. The church has its own army and territory. Among them, the most powerful warriors are the God's Punishment Army. These monsters who have lost their minds are extremely powerful, comparable to extraordinary witches, and there are definitely a lot of them. In addition, they may even have a group of powerful witches, which is why I used the God's Locket of Retribution to temporarily seal your ability. The prince spread out his hands and said, Before you told us this, we always thought that it was the church who built the holy city of Tequila in the barbarian land and fought against the demons. Those ruins were also left by the church. Agatha opened her mouth, but no words came out. An organization composed of mortals unexpectedly took away the most important secrets of the Union, and in turn hunted witches to create the God's Punishment Army to stabilize their rule? She suddenly felt a splitting headache. The God's Punishment Army did not disappear, but fell into the hands of an organization that hated witches. What did the people of the Union do? As if seeing her fatigue and discomfort, Vendi gently pressed her down on the bed and whispered, Let's call it a day. Have a good sleep. Don't worry, we will find out the reason. Then, she felt the God's Locket of Retribution was removed by Anna. Everyone left the room one by one, and the gray-haired prince was the last to leave. Just as he closed the door, Agatha heard a calm and steady voice. You are wrong about one thing. Mortals can defeat the demons. Chapter 349. How is it? Roland put down the pen in his hand and looked up at Nightingale, who had quietly appeared in the office. She's asleep. She just ate a bowl of oatmeal and has a good appetite. She walked to the table and sat back in her usual position. Now it's Sylvie's turn to keep an eye on her. Well, that's good. Do you believe what she said? Nightingale asked. Anyway, the god's stone of retaliation has been removed. When you ask her tomorrow, you can tell whether she's lying or not. But... Roland paused for a moment. I think most of what she said is true. Why? She asked curiously. Did you find out that a person from 400 years ago used the same language and script as us? The prince said, holding his chin. Logically speaking, it's almost impossible for two regions to be separated by the impassable mountain range, unless the two regions were originally of the same origin and had close contact. But she called the four kingdoms the barbarian land. That's the key. I don't know what it was like 400 years ago. Maybe it was just a few scattered villages and some criminals exiled by the witch world. The kingdom's history books also recorded that the major cities were generally established between 200 and 300 years ago, and astrologers appeared in that era. He said with great interest, I've always been curious why astrologers, who generally have no achievements and no research results, can be called sages together with alchemists. Now I understand, the Union led the survivors to escape to this peripheral area, and at the same time, brought their language and civilization. These people integrated into the local people and helped them establish the regime, fortress, and city. You say it as if you saw it with your own eyes. Nightingale smiled and shook her head. This is the only way to explain why we use the same language as her, Roland said seriously. Because we are originally of the same origin. And in the past 400 years, civilization has been in the process of reconstruction, without the slightest development. Well, she said, spreading out her hands. Anyway, we'll know the answer tomorrow. If you guessed wrong, you have to give me a luxurious lunch. The so-called luxurious lunch was actually a combination of corn soup, roasted chicken legs, and ice cream bread, which the kitchen only made once a week. What if you guessed wrong? You can have anything you want. Nightingale tilted her head and narrowed her eyes. Her cheeks and smooth neck formed a perfect curve, making her look exceptionally attractive. If one's appearance was perfect, no matter what they did, they would be tempting others. Roland had finally verified the truth of this saying. I got it, he coughed and turned his attention back to the paper. Since Agatha had just woken up, Roland couldn't force her to answer all his questions accurately and meticulously. He basically followed her train of thought and asked her whatever she thought of, so the information he got was very confusing. What he was doing now was to rearrange the information in Agatha's words and find the key points to understand next. There was no doubt that the most pressing problem was the demons. Why did the war with the demons start and why did they stop now? This information was crucial to Border Town. There had never been a war without a reason, and the demons' behavior didn't seem to be an invasion for resources and expansion. They didn't occupy the barbarian land, nor did they abduct human beings. It looked like an act of pure killing. Roland also noticed that Nightingale mentioned the Battle of Divine Will. Did the two sides start a life-and-death war at the behest of God? But at that time, there wasn't even a shadow of the church, so naturally there was also the only God they claimed. He couldn't feel at ease until he got an explanation for this. At the same time, he also needed to figure out the food, clothing, housing, and transportation of the Holy City's civilization as soon as possible, or what their economic foundation was like. These details could help him measure the level of development of the civilization and indirectly determine the strength of the demons. As for the Union, Roland didn't care too much about it. The small number of witches and the unstable ability of their witches had doomed this organization's combat ability to be very low. Historical experience had repeatedly emphasized that before there was a generational gap, a full-scale war was a battle of attrition. Scarce high-precision weapons couldn't make up for the overall disadvantage. The second point was the magic stone. According to Tilly, the magical characteristics of this stone could greatly make up for the weakness of the unstable ability, so that witches could exert power that didn't belong to them, so that assistant witches could also go to the battlefield, although in Roland's eyes, this was completely putting the cart before the horse. He couldn't wait to turn all combat witches into assistant witches and throw them into endless production work. However, it was strange that the Union, which had many witches, didn't use this method to fight against the demons. Instead, it chose to create the gods' punishment army, which was really incredible. Did the magic stone have some unknown shortcomings, or was it extremely difficult to produce? Fortunately, Agatha was a member of the Quest Society, which was similar to the current alchemy workshop. It gathered a group of extremely talented witches and specialized in the research of magic stones and magic power. Roland faintly felt that there should be a lot of potential in it. The last question was about the church. He drew a circle on this column. Obviously, he couldn't get the answer from Agatha about the establishment and development of this organization. What he could infer from the few words was that the church was established after the witches were defeated. They obtained the secret of the Union and covered up everything about the witches, rendering them as the incarnation of the demons. If the people of the Four Kingdoms were regarded as the descendants of the indigenous people, then the church was a veritable outsider. In addition, the indigenous people had no civilization to speak of, so it was not surprising that they were deceived by fabricated history and oracle. All of this was just because the witches used to oppress ordinary people, so the refugees who escaped from the Four Kingdoms saw the witches as enemies, and even hunted witches on this continent. Roland frowned. It sounded reasonable, but he felt something was wrong. There were many blessed warriors and extraordinary in the Union, and even transcendents. Even if they had the god's stone of retaliation, they couldn't defeat such an opponent, could they? If they wanted to completely wipe out a force that was much stronger than them, hatred alone could not do it. The information was obviously missing a key piece of information. That witch doesn't seem to like you very much, Nightingale suddenly said. After all, she lives in a world where all witches are superior to others. Roland laughed. In her eyes, I'm afraid I'm no different from the weeds on the roadside. You don't hate her. Why should I? She's just a poor person abandoned by the times. He shook his head. After sleeping in the ice coffin for more than 400 years, she woke up to find that the world was completely different. The fear brought by this feeling of strangeness will definitely make her build a mental wall to defend herself. Once she accepts all of this, she should slowly change her mind. Sure enough, that's your way of answering. Nightingale smiled. Don't worry, I won't let her offend you in the slightest. Chapter 350. When Agatha woke up again, there was no one in the room. The thick curtains were closed, and it seemed particularly quiet. Probably because she was not familiar with the environment, there was a candle beside the bed, the orange flame quietly burning. She tilted her head and looked for a long time, but found that not a single drop of wax flowed out. The candle was always so long, as if it would never burn out. It should be caused by magic, she thought. The quilt on his body was very soft. It was probably made of high-quality cotton, and the inside was filled with light and warm fluffy blankets. This kind of treatment was no worse than when she was in the holy city of Tequila. It was hard to believe that there could be such a comfortable bed and bedroom in the barbarian land. She moved her fingers, and her physical strength had recovered by more than half. Agatha turned over and got out of bed. She stimulated her magic, and cold air suddenly overflowed from her fingers. It seemed that the prince really didn't do anything, but removed the god's stone of retaliation, giving her a certain degree of freedom. She went to the window and opened a corner of the curtain. It was dark outside, and she couldn't see the stars or the moon. The whole earth seemed to be swallowed by darkness, and only a few hazy flames in the distance could be seen swaying. Through the window, she could hear the whistling wind outside, and occasionally see some snowflakes falling on the glass. It seemed to be winter, and it was also a good season for witches to awaken. In Tequila, it was impossible to see such a night. Every day in winter was a day of celebration for the whole city. The streets were lit by bonfires all night long, and when she looked out from the tower, it seemed that the whole city had been set on fire. The flashing flames were like stars, symbolizing hope and the future. People gathered around the bonfires and prayed, eager to gather magic to cross the mortal world. Every time a witch appeared, the fate of her family would also change, and from then on they would not have to worry about food and clothing. Agatha pulled the bolt and opened the window. The cold wind suddenly entered the room, blowing the curtains backwards. The candles in the room also went out. Darkness immediately surged in, filling up every corner of the room tightly. When her eyes adapted to the darkness, she could see the snow on the roofs of the town, reflecting a faint white light. Judging from the scope of the buildings, this place was indeed not very big, which was consistent with the border town that the prince had mentioned. In such cold weather, ordinary people would freeze after staying outside for a few hours, but Agatha was not afraid of the cold. Her body would automatically ignore the cold that made her feel slightly uncomfortable. The first time she felt cold was before her awakening. Now, she had almost forgotten about it. Closing her eyes, Agatha's mind was filled with the previous conversation. The Union had perished, and the witches had become the demon's minions. Relying on the god's stone of retaliation, the mortals were wantonly hunting witches. From the note, Alice and Natalia had successfully escaped from the fertile plains. If even they could not stop all this, the Union's destruction was already a foregone conclusion. What happened at that time that caused these two transcendents to be defeated by mortals? She simply did not want to continue thinking about it. "Aren't you cold?" someone behind him suddenly asked. Agatha was shocked. She turned around and saw a woman sitting on the edge of the bed in the dim light. Her face was completely hidden in the night, like a quietly appearing ghost. At this time, the door was still closed, and she had not heard any footsteps before. "If you can close the window, I don't mind lighting the candle again," she said again. There was no doubt that the woman was a witch. What was she doing here so late at night? Agatha nodded calmly, closed the window, and quietly let the thin layer of ice creep over her skin. The woman did not do anything dangerous. Instead, she opened the first shelf of the bedside table, took out a fire sickle, and lit the candle. As the flame lit up, she saw the woman's appearance: beautiful blonde curly hair, slender eyebrows, and very sharp eyes. She was not any witch she had seen before. "Nice to meet you." "No, this is the second time." She raised the corner of her mouth. "My name is Nightingale." Does it mean that she was also hiding in the crowd before? "Is this your ability?" Agatha frowned. "Are you also a senior awakened?" Even if she was a respectable senior witch, it was very rude to break in without a greeting. "Ah, you mean evolution." Nightingale shook her head. "I'm not as smart as Anna. She can read through what's the basis of nature in such a short time. When I saw those formulas and theorems, my head was about to explode. I'm probably not going to evolve in this life." Half of the words in the short answer could not be understood. Agatha was stunned. She really did not expect that the original witch would say such words, and looking at her expression, it did not seem that she was deliberately teasing her. "Is this the knowledge that the prince mentioned? That book? What's the basis of nature? Can I have a look?" "Of course, as long as you are willing to join the Witch Union and serve His Royal Highness." She shrugged. "Serve a mortal?" Agatha's eyes widened. After a long time, she whispered, "I thought I was weird enough, but I didn't expect you to be crazier than me." "Weird? Crazier?" Nightingale tilted her head and said, "Why do you say that?" In the holy city of Tequila, most of the awakened only regard ordinary people who can't condense magic as lowly servants, inferior people, or fertility tools. She slowly said, "But I don't think so. Although they are stupid, they are not hopeless. As long as they are taught to learn and think, these people can do most things as well as witches. Because of this, many people think that I have a strange nature, and actually hand over some of the tower's affairs to the mortals. I didn't expect you to go one step further than me, to actually recognize a mortal as your master and serve him. His Royal Highness Roland does not regard us as servants." Nightingale curled her lips. I don't know what kind of strange understanding you have of the word serve, but the fact is that he took in the witches who were oppressed by the church, gave our sisters new strength, and let us live together with the people in the western region. All of us fought against the church, demonic beasts, and in the future, we will also fight against the devil together. But this model has been proven to be a failure. Agatha could not help raising her voice. More than 400 years ago, for you, it may be 800 years ago. It was the era when mortals and witches ruled together. At that time, human beings almost covered the entire land of Dawn, but in the face of the devil's attack, the result was a crushing defeat, and only a corner of the fertile plains was left. Oh. She raised her eyebrows. There is such a thing. You said that this buried history has been more than 450 years, right? Agatha continued. According to the Union's records, the third battle of divine will begin soon, but you know nothing about the devil. To the east of the barbarian land is the swirling sea. Where can you retreat to? Only by re-establishing the Union, uniting the witches, and improving the probability of senior awakening according to the knowledge, can we seize the last chance to stop the devil's attack. Why do you have to say that? What? More than 400 years have passed, right? A lot of things can be changed in 400 years. Why do you still cling to the previous idea and refuse to let go? Nightingale sighed. You heard what His Highness said before he left. Mortals can defeat the devil. He's also trying to unite people, but not just witches. He wants to unite every ordinary person on the continent. He told me that the people on the continent are the most powerful group. Huang, Agatha was about to refute this nonsense, but she suddenly stopped. She said it so confidently, as if she had already seen the result. Could 400 years really change all of this? Could it be that, the gray-haired prince has such an incredible ability that even mortals can have the power of beautiful witches? You seem to have realized it. Nightingale smiled. There's still a long time. Why don't you let go of the wall in your heart and see with your own eyes? This time, Agatha was silent for a long time. I can see that you don't like me. Roland did not refute. The witches of the Quest Society often look at me like that. Ever since they found out that I used a group of mortals as experimental assistants in the tower, she said. You obviously don't like me. Why are you telling me this? As long as you keep your arrogance in check and treat His Highness normally, I don't really hate you. As for the latter. She paused. Because His Highness said he doesn't want to see you abandoned by the times. Chapter 351. Standing at the top of the Tower of Babel, Maine looked through the window at the city of Hermes, which was wrapped in silver. Since the last time when a large group of demonic beasts attacked the new holy city, the ice field had temporarily calmed down and the snow had weakened a lot. The residents of the city had a rare leisure time. These days should have been a day of celebration, but Maine's heart was still empty. In order to kill those terrible giant hybrid demonic beasts, a team of God's punishment army warriors rushed out of the city wall through the side door and confronted them head-on. In the end, 19 of them were injured and 2 died. After their limbs were cut off, the 2 giant beasts lay on the ground and roared for a long time. Finally, the guards on the city wall killed them with spears. However, compared to the loss of the God's punishment army, what scared him the most was the time period represented by the demonic beasts. After a long silence, he let out a long sigh and returned to the table. He wanted to open the Holy Bible again and read it carefully. Even if you break it, the result won't change, Taefun said as he walked into the circular hall with 2 cups of hot drinks. He pushed one of the cups in front of Maine and said, His Holiness O'Brien still hasn't agreed to see you? I've sent a request to the pivotal secret area for the 3rd time, but there's still no response. Maine said anxiously. I don't know what His Holiness is busy with. At this critical moment. Don't worry. Taefun interrupted him. You said that the Holy Bible was written by the first pope, so it's inevitable that there will be mistakes. After more than 400 years, who can guarantee that everything is correct? But this is different. The archbishop shook his head. If the time is wrong, it will be a disaster for us. Now we have invested a lot of power and energy in unifying the kingdom in order to gather the strength of the whole continent to fight against the demons. But if the time is reduced by half, we will not be able to accumulate so many God's punishment army soldiers after the war. Be quiet, Your Excellency Maine. The old archbishop smiled and slowly took a sip of the hot drink. The fact has happened. The fangs of hell have appeared in front of us, and no one can change it. But there may be 2 reasons for this. What reasons? Have a drink first, he said, stroking his beard. Maine picked up the cup. It looked like a cup of goat milk, but when he got closer, a spicy aroma rushed into his nose. What's in it? Winter flower, Taefun smirked. Although you can't drink the dreamland water directly, it's not a bad idea to drink some of it. It can at least help you ease your nerves and help you sleep. Maine drank the goat's milk in one gulp and felt a burning sensation in his throat. Although the mellow taste of the goat's milk diluted the irritation of the winter flower juice, it was still difficult for him to adapt since he didn't drink this kind of drink often. He coughed twice and wiped his mouth. Even a cup of dreamland water can't make me fall asleep. Can you tell me now? Taefun shrugged. One possibility is that the Pope made a mistake. For an old man, it's not uncommon for him to feel dizzy and make mistakes in his memory. I know this very well. It's unlikely. Maine frowned. This is related to the layout and arrangements of the church, and even the fate of mankind. He must have been very cautious in writing this content. What's the second reason? The second possibility is that because of some unknown circumstances, everything has changed. The archbishop waited for a moment, but when he saw that Taefun had no intention of continuing, he asked in surprise, "That's it?" "That's it," he repeated. Is this a joke? Everything has changed. Because of this reason, all our efforts will go down the drain. Why can't you just, Lord Maine? Taefun's voice suddenly rose a few octaves. What on earth are you asking for? Is it a way to defeat the demons? Or do you think that only you want to protect Hermes and stop the demons outside of the ice field? Maine was stunned. Everyone hopes to win every battle, but so far, even against the 4 kingdoms, we haven't won every battle, let alone the demons from hell. Have you forgotten the teachings of His Holiness the Supreme Pontiff? There's not much difference between asking too much and fearing the result. What you need to do is to accept the fact, and then walk step by step to the end. As for the result, it's not something we can control. Fearing the result. Maine was shocked. Taefun was right. He was indeed afraid. He was afraid that after he became the Pope, he would not be able to stop the demons, and that mankind would eventually die in his hands. I used to be like you, Taefun suddenly said in a low voice. But Heather's death made me understand that the result is often unpredictable. The months of demons came early without warning, and we still conquered Wolfheart City before the snow fell, just as planned. But Heather still died, and the way of the war also changed. Even so, we still have to keep going. He got up and let out a long breath, patted Maine on the shoulder, and walked out of the hall. So, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, you have to persevere until the end. Not because you want to win, but because you have to fulfill your duty, even if the result is contrary to your wishes. The hall door closed. Maine looked at the empty cup in front of him and was speechless for a long time. He had to admit that what Taefun said made sense, but how could he not feel afraid when he really had to shoulder this responsibility? Suddenly, a presiding judge came in and said, Lord Maine, His Holiness the Supreme Pontiff wants to see you. Finally. Maine immediately stood up and said eagerly, take me to the pivotal secret area. The pivotal secret area, hidden deep under the plateau, was still cold and silent. Walking into the hall of the pivotal secret temple, Maine was slightly startled. There was no conversion ceremony arranged today, but all the candles in the hall were lit, and the dense flames outlined an orange outline of the hall. The chandelier above his head was like a divine kingdom that gathered the stars. His Holiness O'Brien sat on the throne and looked at him quietly. Maine felt a little strange. He suppressed the doubts in his heart, walked to the seat, and knelt down with his forehead touching the ground. "Get up, child." The Supreme Pontiff's voice was very soft, and it was difficult to hear what he said without paying attention. Maine straightened up and saw that the Supreme Pontiff's face was full of uncontrollable old age and fatigue, as if he had not rested for a long time. "Your Holiness, please take care of yourself." "No need." He smiled, and deep wrinkles suddenly covered his cheeks. "I'm about to die." "Your Holiness, you won't. No, listen to me, child." O'Brien interrupted the bishop's words with difficulty. "I know the condition of my body. There is no doubt that my time is coming." He paused for a moment and took a deep breath. "The reason I called you here today is to pass on the position of Supreme Pontiff to you." Chapter 352. Maine was stunned. He stared at the old man in front of him, trying to see something from his eyes. However, his eyes were cloudy. His eyes were no longer as deep and frightening as they used to be, able to pierce people's hearts. He may have the wisdom passed down by the previous popes, and the knowledge obtained from the canon of 10,000 laws, but everything was no match for time. His Holiness was not joking. Maine realized that his journey had come to an end. His eyes became a little blurred. He knelt down again, his forehead touching the ground. This time, His Holiness did not ask him to get up as usual, but waited for him to complete the whole set of movements before saying, "Follow me." The serving guards helped the Pope onto a cart, and then pushed him to the gate of the pivotal secret area. Maine followed closely behind. They left the pivotal secret temple and turned into a long and narrow tunnel. On the smooth stone wall, there was a glowing crystal embedded every 10 steps. As far as the eye could see, there was no end to it. After walking for an unknown amount of time, Maine finally left the passageway, and his line of sight suddenly opened up. Under his feet was a flat stone floor, and he could see the angular walls and the chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Apparently, this secret passageway was connected to a basement. "We are under the cathedral of the old holy city." The Pope probably saw through his confusion and took the initiative to say, "The structure here is exactly the same as the cathedral, but it was built upside down. I used to call it the Reflection Church." "Under the cathedral?" Maine was surprised. "I always thought there was no basement." "There is no basement, because the two are not connected." O'Brien smiled. "You can only come here from the underground passage of the pivotal secret area. The roof is made of a mixture of stone and clay several feet thick, and can't be penetrated by ordinary means." "Why is it designed like this?" "To keep the secret, but not to completely bury it," he said. "Before any pope ascends the throne, he must come to the Reflection Church to witness the establishment, development, and growth of the church, and at the same time remember the goal of the church. To defeat the demons," Maine said solemnly. But O'Brien did not nod in affirmation. Instead, he sighed. "No, child, it is to win the smile of God." The Archbishop was stunned. "What?" The Pope did not respond to him again. Instead, he commanded the guards to move forward. According to the direction of the stairs and the ramp, they should be climbing up. Soon, the group arrived in front of a grand hall. Maine recognized the familiar structure of the surroundings. This should be the prayer room of the Reflection Church. The thick wooden door creaked as it was slowly pushed open. Although it seemed that the Pope had not visited this hall for a long time, he did not smell any dust. Obviously, someone had been cleaning this place. "They can only send me up to here." "You can push me in next," O'Brien said. "Yes, Your Holiness." Maine took the handle and pushed the Pope into the prayer room. The wooden door behind him closed again, completely blocking the light of the torch. Now, there was only the soft light emitted by the yellow crystal in the room. Like the layout of the secret passage, it was evenly embedded on both sides of the wall. But the difference was that there was a huge portrait hanging above the crystal. He vaguely remembered that the position of the portrait should be the window opening of the prayer room above ground. The content of the portrait was similar. They were all half-body portraits of people dressed in gorgeous robes. They were in high spirits and their eyes were full of spirit, as if they were staring at every visitor who walked into the prayer room. And Maine suddenly saw the portrait of His Holiness O'Brien. In the portrait, he looked almost like a real person, staring at him with a smile. This strange feeling made him shiver uncontrollably. Goosebumps appeared on his back. "Ah, you see me." The Pope probably sensed the change in the Archbishop's emotions. "This painting was completed half a year ago. I wasn't as old then, so it should look better. But it should have been hung after I died." He looked at it carefully. "I was too impatient. I wanted to see how I would look like when I was hung up." "Your Holiness, are these?" Maine felt his throat go dry. "Yes, they are all great pioneers, Your Holiness," he said softly. "Let's continue forward. I will introduce them to you one by one." The Archbishop listened to His Holiness O'Brien's summary while he looked at the portraits. Even though he knew that they were once the highest leaders of the Church, he still could not get rid of the strangeness in his heart. The figures in the paintings were too realistic. He could not imagine what kind of technique and dye the painter had used to create such half-body portraits. Coupled with the dim yellow light, the upper half of the portraits would gradually fade into the darkness as he walked further away, leaving only the lower half of the faces grinning at him. Halfway through the hall, Maine suddenly noticed that the figures in the portraits had become women. They looked different and wore different clothes, but they were all beautiful. Such an outstanding appearance rarely appeared on the faces of mortals. The Archbishop was no stranger to this, but it was precisely because of this that he was extremely confused and surprised. His Holiness O'Brien did not seem to have any reaction. He continued to calmly introduce their names, tenure, and achievements. These people were also the popes of the Church. He soon reached the end of the prayer room. Facing the aisle in the middle of the hall was a full-body portrait that took up an entire wall. It was hung behind the prayer altar and surrounded by glowing crystals, so the picture was even clearer. Maine swallowed and looked at the person in the portrait. The moment his gaze fell on the portrait, he suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. God above, what a peerless woman that was. Other than this, it was hard for him to find any other words to describe her. She had the beauty of a woman and the fortitude of a man. Both were natural and did not conflict when they appeared at the same time. Her red hair was like a burning flame, and the huge sword in her hand was like an extinguishing frost. She stood with her sword, her eyebrows slightly raised. She looked down at the front and her thin lips were tightly shut. Under that pair of sharp and threatening eyes, Maine felt an overwhelming pressure that almost made him want to kneel in front of this woman. Your Holiness, this is, he turned his head with difficulty, but found that O'Brien had already knelt down. She is the first pope, above the transcendence, Alice. At the same time, she also has a nickname, the Queen of Witches. Maine felt his heart skip a beat. His previous guess was completely correct. The series of popes in the early days of the Church were all witches. Why is the founder of the Church also a witch? Kneel down to greet her, child. After that, I will let you see everything you want to know. Chapter 353. After bowing, Maine helped the Pope back to the cart. "Zero," O'Brien gasped and called out in a low voice. A pure witch dressed in white walked out from a small door at the side. Her footsteps were so light that no sound could be heard. "I'm here." The Archbishop frowned. He did not expect that there would be a pure witch in such a secret place. Although they were brought up by the Pope after their awakening and served His Holiness for the rest of their lives, but these women were witches after all. Moreover, she seemed to know about the existence of the Reflection Church earlier than he did, which made him slightly unhappy. "Take him to the illusion room." "Okay." She walked to the prayer table and pressed on the stone-carved Holy Bible on the table. With a flash of magic power, the huge painting behind her slowly rose up and revealed a dark metal door. Zero then took the pendant from the Pope's neck and inserted it into the lock of the door. With a click, the iron door opened inward. After taking out the pendant, she did not return it to His Holiness O'Brien, but handed it to Maine. The Archbishop looked back at the Pope, who nodded. "Take it. From now on, you'll be in charge of it. Whether it's the library of the pivotal secret temple or the secret door of the research agency, you can use this crystal to open them. Let's go." Zero smiled and took Maine's hand. They walked into the room behind the huge painting. This should be the place where the surface church did not exist. In the same position, there was only a floor-to-ceiling window facing the Hermes Plateau. The room looked very spacious and circular. It was about half the size of the prayer hall and could accommodate dozens of people standing side by side. It was difficult to associate it with a secret room. However, there were no furnishings in the large space. It looked empty, and the only place to sit was a stone bench that extended along the curved wall. After the metal door was closed, Maine shook off the pure witch's hand. "Did His Holiness allow you to come in?" Zero said indifferently, "If I don't come in, who will activate the illusion magic stone?" "You can't activate your magic power." Such a rude answer made Maine's heart skip a beat. It seemed that she still considered herself as His Holiness O'Brien's witch. When he took over the scepter and took charge of the church, he would definitely make her understand that not only the Pope himself, but also the archbishops who were qualified to inherit the church were also people to be respected. "Then let's begin." He suppressed the surging emotions in his heart and sat down on the stone bench. "Yes, Your Excellency." Zero lifted a secret board on the wall and pressed her hand on the magic stone. "But please be prepared, because it's also my first time activating this thing." First time? Hadn't she lived for more than 200 years? Had she not participated in the previous papal handover ceremonies? Maine felt slightly strange in his heart, but he didn't have time to think about it. A dazzling light flashed, and he was surprised to find himself in darkness. The darkness was so pure that no light source could be seen at all. The walls, floor, and stone benches seemed to have disappeared. It was as if he had been swallowed by a giant beast from the abyss. Suddenly, he lost the concept of distance. The sky and the ground merged into one, and everything he could see was black. He lowered his head, and even his body was submerged in the darkness. Maine held his breath and carefully reached down. The stone bench was still under his body. He stamped his feet and found that the floor was the same. This made him feel a little relieved. It seemed that he hadn't been transferred to a new basement. It was just that the power of the magic stone had swallowed all the light here. But how could he see the truth mentioned by His Holiness in such darkness? As if to answer his question, the ground lit up again. However, it was obvious that this was not the scene in the secret room. Every stone slab was polished until it was bright and glossy. Complicated and exquisite patterns were carved on them, and they reflected a dark blue luster. Soon, the light sprinkled down from above, and he was surprised to see a transparent skylight appear on the ceiling. Through this window, he could even see the clear sky and clouds outside. After a while, other furnishings in the room appeared one by one, a marble round table, a circle of chairs, a map and a glass on the table, hanging curtains, a decorative sword and shield, and a giant deer head hanging at the top of the main entrance. Then, figures appeared. Maine could not believe his eyes as he saw the lifelike figures of women appear in his field of vision. They were dressed in gorgeous robes and were sitting around the round table. Among them, the one who sat facing the door of the hall was the red-haired Queen of Witches. Her hands were hanging down and folded in front of her. She held her head high and looked straight ahead. Everyone else's eyes were focused on her. Everything looked like a realistic picture. Is this the meaning of the illusion? Maine thought. When the scene in front of him was so rich that it was no different from the real scene, everyone seemed to come alive in an instant. "Everyone, the experiment of the gods' punishment army has been successful," a witch beside Alice said. At present, the gods' punishment army seemed to be extremely fierce, fearless of death, and extremely powerful. Even the weak assistant witches could be transformed into powerful warriors no less than the original extraordinary. In addition, they also had the ability to disrupt the release of magic power, which was undoubtedly a great advantage when facing mad demons and lords of hell who also needed to drive magic stones. But the transformation ritual consumed the witches' lives, and I heard that not everyone could be transformed successfully. Someone said. These are just some unimportant details. She spread her hands. I believe that as the research continues, the Quest Society will definitely find a way to make up for it. Don't say it so easily, Elaine. We are the minority, and every witch is precious. The person frowned. What's the difference between dying in the hands of the demons and dying in the ritual? Elaine said with her head held high. At least the latter could still make one last contribution to the Union. What did you say? That's enough. Alice said softly. Although her voice was very low, the scene instantly quieted down. Everyone closed their mouths and waited for the Queen of Witches to say next. Mortals can't defeat the demons, my sisters, she said calmly. We can do nothing and enjoy this last moment of peace, quietly waiting for the demon's next invasion, and then history will completely erase us. We can also make one last effort and put our hopes on Scourge and make sacrifices for him. I admit that this is a difficult choice, but as long as the human race can continue, the witches will never die. Although I am the Queen of Starfall City, I am willing to give you this important choice. Do you want to give up resistance and die quietly, or do you want to avenge your lost sisters, drive the demons out of the Land of Dawn, and restore the glory of the witches? It's all your freedom. Of course, no one here can personally participate in the third battle of divine will, so no matter what choice you make, we can live peacefully in this short life. Remember, the choice you make now is not only for yourself, but also for the witches, so that in the future, your sisters can still see the smile of God. Those who disagree, please stand up now. Chapter 354. So that's what happened. Maine stared intently at this illusion, the shock he felt in his heart could not be any greater. The God's Punishment Army transformation ritual was invented by the witches. In order to defeat the demons, they didn't hesitate to sacrifice their own kind. How many of them would stand up and scold her ruthlessness? The final result was beyond his expectation. After a quarter of an hour, no one stood up. Even the witch who questioned the ritual did not openly oppose Alice's words. She just clenched her teeth and smashed the table. How ironic. Killing so many witches with her own hands for the continuation of witches, is there anything more ridiculous than this? But she's right, an older witch said. After all, we were born from mortals. When all humans perish, witches will also cease to exist. On the other hand, no matter how many witches are sacrificed in the transformation ritual, there will always be new witches to replace them. The more mortals there are, the more witches there will be. Elaine shrugged. Can the God's Punishment Army defeat the demons? Someone asked. I don't know, Alice said again. No one knows the answer until we try. The two defeats in the previous battles of Divine Will had proved that the demons were far more powerful than us. The only thing that restricted them was the red mist. This meant that even if we created a large number of God's punishment warriors, we still might not be able to win the battle. She paused. But you should know my style. Elaine smiled. Even if there is only a slight possibility, we will try our best. I'm willing to follow you. For the continuation of witches. I don't want to admit defeat. Everyone stood up and saluted the Queen of Witches. The witch who questioned the ritual was the last to stand up and said, I hope you're right. Then it's decided. Alice nodded. It was obvious that she was not surprised by the result. The next step was to convince the other members of the Union. They may not necessarily listen to you, the older witch said. If we want to carry out the transformation of the gods' punishment army without any resistance, the witches can no longer be a superior and privileged existence. The union must be disbanded and everything that happened in the past must be completely buried. I'll try my best to convince them. Alice's voice is firm. If they can't accept it, Starfall City will carry out this plan alone and rebuild the new order. Then the image disappeared, and darkness swallowed everything again. When the light in the secret room returned to normal, Maine found that his back was soaked in cold sweat, and his mind was extremely dizzy. You look a little tired. Do you need me to help you out? Zero walked over and asked. No need, hurry up and open the door. He gasped for air. After the metal door was pushed open, Maine stumbled out of the illusory room. He covered his mouth as he ran down the prayer platform and knelt before O'Brien. Once the magic stone is activated, it will automatically project the image into your mind, so it's normal to feel uncomfortable, the Pope said in a low voice. I reacted the same way you did when I first came into contact with this. I'll recover after some rest. Why is nothing wrong with me? Zero asked, holding the Pope's arm. Because you're a witch, and your body has long been accustomed to the operation of magic power, O'Brien said with a benevolent smile. Witches are generally better than mortals in terms of endurance and resistance. It took Maine a long time to calm his breathing. Is this the origin of the church? That's right. Alice later led Starfall City to fight against the witches of the other two cities and eventually won. She established a new rule. Witches were no longer the high and mighty chosen one, but evildoers seduced by the devil. This war lasted for nearly 100 years, and in the history books, it's called the War of Faith. Did she live for that long? The Pope shook his head. Not long after Alice established the church, she died together with another transcendent. The second Pope inherited her will and continued to lead the army to fight until the other two forces were completely subdued. Unfortunately, this war greatly damaged the vitality of the three cities, and they almost lost control of the secular world. The mortals who were unwilling to participate in the War of the Witches began to take root in this narrow continent, leading the local people to reclaim and build. Gradually, the four kingdoms were formed. For some reason, O'Brien became more energetic as he spoke, and even his voice became coherent, no longer as weak as before. Although the church repeatedly cleaned up the remnants, including the mortals who didn't belong to Starfall City, the secular world had already been formed. Due to the lack of follow-up, the church ultimately failed to unify the continent. All of this was due to the premature death of the Witch King. Natalia, whom she regarded as a friend, not only didn't accept her plan, but also suddenly attacked Alice during the meeting. This scene was recorded in the complete Holy Bible. The Pope sighed. If she was still alive, the War of Faith would have ended 50 years earlier. At that time, the church could have taken in all the witches and taken advantage of the situation to unify the continent. No one would have thought that it would be delayed until now. Maine wiped the sweat off his forehead. Your Majesty, there's something I don't understand. Why were the previous popes all held by witches, but all the later popes became ordinary people? Zero, you can leave first, O'Brien said after a moment of silence. Yes. After the pure witch left, he slowly said, because of cowardice and cowardice. What? Roland was startled and wondered if he had misheard. No, child, you didn't mishear. O'Brien seemed to have seen through his mind. His eyes sparkled as if he had returned to his youth. In order to restore the glory of witches after defeating the demons, Alice once stipulated that the position of Pope must be held by an extraordinary. However, extraordinary witches were very rare, and it wasn't always possible to find a suitable candidate. Later on, some outstanding ordinary witches also held the position of Pope. However, cowardice and cowardice were like poisonous snakes in people's hearts. Once they appeared, they couldn't be stopped. As a mortal, the Archbishop was afraid that one day he would be punished by the oppressed witches, so he directly usurped the position of Pope. Maine's eyes widened. So the popes after that were all, yes, We were all cowards who stole the results of the witch's sacrifice. The Pope let out a long sigh. No matter what happens in the future, the Church will bury this secret forever. He paused for a moment. As for the truth of the battle of divine will, it's all recorded in the pivotal secret temple. Now it's up to you to bear all of this and continue on your path. Even if you give up, it's still a wise choice. After saying these words, he suddenly relaxed, as if a heavy burden had been removed from his body. He leaned against the cart. Give up. If he gave up, who else could take over this position? However, before Maine had time to think about it, he had already discovered that something was wrong with O'Brien. His physical condition had taken a sharp turn for the worse. His previous energetic appearance seemed to have been a brief moment of lucidity. Now his eyes were rapidly dilating, and the light was gradually dimming. Your Holiness, O'Brien. Maine anxiously went forward and shook O'Brien, but he just stared blankly at the ceiling, his lips slightly opened and closed, as if he was murmuring something. At the last moment, Maine seemed to hear him say, "Child, I'm sorry." Chapter 355. The night faded, and a dim light shone through the gaps in the curtains. It was dawn. Agatha had barely slept all night, her mind was filled with the words of Nightingale. The people of the continent are the most powerful group. 400 years can change a lot of things. Why do you still hold on to your previous ideas and refuse to let go? There's still a lot of time. You can confirm it with your eyes. She got out of bed, walked to the clothes rack, and stroked the robe that symbolized the Tequila Quest Society. She remembered that when she got the robe through the unanimous approval of the 3 chiefs, she was so happy that she felt like she was about to fly. Exploring the mysteries of magic was her lifelong pursuit, and the Quest Society believed in the most was that existence was the truth. If those mortals could really prove their power, Agatha put on the robe, opened the door, and walked to the hall. No matter what, she might be the last member of the Quest Society and the only survivor of Tequila. It would take more than 1 or 2 days to rebuild the new holy city. Before that, she might as well see with her own eyes what the mortal prince could do to make the witches listen to him. After breakfast, Agatha, accompanied by Vendi, went to the gray-haired prince's office. His attire was not much different from 400 years ago, but the feeling he gave off was different from the mercenaries, merchants, and farmers that were commonly seen in downtown. He was also different from the family's guard captain, Kraft. Most of them only needed a glance to determine the depth of a person's strength, and they could even almost guess the thoughts in their hearts. He was so simple that he was like an empty symbol. However, this method could not be used on the prince, especially his eyes. They were obviously ordinary gray pupils, but they were full of indescribable spirit and confidence. Especially the latter, which was different from the confidence brought by blind optimism. Instead, it came from a calmness that did not match his age. It was as if he had lived for thousands of years and knew everything in the world like the back of his hand. Why do I have such a feeling? His name is Roland Wimbledon. Agatha silently remembered this name in her heart. How was your rest last night? The prince smiled. Oatmeal and fried eggs after 400 years should still be to your taste, right? Barely. It would have been better if you hadn't sent a witch into my room without permission. He was slightly startled, then shook his head helplessly. All right, she'll knock on the door in the future. By the way, if you want to go out and explore the town and the customs of this era, you can ask Nightingale to lead the way. If you want to check the history books, you can ask Lady Scroll. She has memorized all the books she has read. Folk customs. Agatha frowned and said, the threat of the devil is right in front of us. I just want to see how you dare to boast that mortals can also defeat the devil. If we can't stop their attack, history and customs are meaningless. The prince pursed his lips. Compared to heavy industry, light industry, and people's livelihood are also very important. Why are they all interested in shooting cannons? What is heavy and what is light? No, it's nothing. The other party exhaled. You'll see. We're going to test the performance of the new weapon this afternoon. But before that, I have some questions to ask you about the holy city of Tequila 450 years ago. A new weapon operated by mortals? Agatha couldn't help but think of the crossbow and the catapult. If it was just an improved version of these things, it was far from enough to deal with the devil. But she didn't express the doubts in her heart. Ask away. You mentioned before that the holy city of Tequila is a city ruled by witches. Ordinary people without magic can only be regarded as the lower class of people. So how many meals do they eat a day? What's their staple food? Do they eat a lot of meat? Agatha couldn't help but be surprised. She didn't expect that the other party would ask her such a question. Civilians also have a high or low status. Ordinary people who can work for senior witches and take on some chores and city defense are equal to the weakest assistant witches. Farmers and merchants are next, and slaves and coolies are last. As for these questions you asked, I can't answer them. No witch living in the upper city will pay attention to what ordinary people eat. As for the guards and servants in my tower, they are all provided with 3 meals a day. Except for the months of demons, they can eat meat once a week. How much are they paid? What's that? Money? She raised her eyebrows. They become my followers and serve me for a lifetime. I give them shelter, food, and teach them knowledge. Other than that, I don't need any other compensation. I see. The other party wrote something on the paper with great interest. Like farming, raising livestock, making ironware, witches also participate in it. Of course, these are the jobs of assistant witches, Agatha replied. Even if it's them, they are much better than ordinary people. Ordinary people can't meet the needs of the union. This kind of question and answer lasted for nearly an hour. He seemed to be particularly interested in the life of the witches in the major cities and asked very detailed questions, which made it difficult for Agatha to understand. Compared with these insignificant questions, did he not care about the demons that had occupied more than half of the land of Dawn and were about to launch another invasion? The prince rested for a moment and handed the notes in his hand to scroll. You said that you are a member of the Quest Society, and that this organization specializes in the study of magic stones and magic power? Agatha finally asked a decent question. She nodded and said, yes, the so-called magic stone is transformed from the god's stone of retaliation. It can not only suppress a witch's ability, but also enable a witch to exert a completely different power. This sentence stunned everyone. The witch who called herself Tilly blurted out, how do we do it? She finally found some of the feeling of being valued in the past and could not help but feel a little proud. This is the secret that the Quest Society has been pursuing for more than 400 years. In order to understand the relationship between magic power and magic stones, we have put in countless efforts. I can tell you, but you have to take out knowledge that can increase the probability of a witch's awakening in exchange. Tilly and Roland looked at each other. Of course, this is not a problem, but I have a question. She raised her left hand, the blue crystal ring on her finger reflecting a striking luster. This magic stone was found in an ancient ruin. It can give me the ability to fly freely. There is no doubt that this magic stone is very useful. When fighting with the demons, whether it is attacking or retreating, it can give the troops the upper hand. It can also save a lot of time on the road. She paused. But why do you still rely on walking when you retreat? Even a high-grade awakened like you doesn't have such a convenient magic stone. Isn't it strange? Chapter 356. Agatha was stunned. She did not expect that Roland would have a stone of flight and had already figured out how to use it. After hesitating for a while, she said, we just understand the relationship between magic power and magic stones, but we can't make magic stones. Can't make magic stones? Tilly was surprised. What do you mean? These magic stones are made by the demons. She sighed. If we could get a stable source of magic stones, we could turn assistant witches into combat witches, and there would be no god's punishment army. Made by the demons? The witches could not help but look surprised. Only Roland's face darkened. How much do you know about the making of magic stones? He asked. How are these stones made? The tone of these two questions was a little stiff. Agatha did not want to answer, but considering that the demons were the witches' ultimate enemies, she had to tell them this sooner or later. She had no choice but to criticize Roland's rudeness in her heart. She slowly replied, there is a strange individual among the demons. We call it the Beast of Chaos. It looks like a huge flower bud. When it stands up, it is about 3 or 4 people tall. It crawls slowly with tentacles. After it swallows a god's stone of retaliation, it can produce various types of magic stones. The speed of transformation varies according to the type of stone. Have you seen these with your own eyes? We once caught one alive. She was very dissatisfied with the prince's questioning. The blessed army made a detour and raided a devil's town far away from the battlefield. There was a beast of chaos that was producing stones of lighting. The witches brought it back to Tequila and made it work for the holy city. This kind of demon is extremely low in intelligence. As long as it is constantly fed with stones, it will automatically transform. Unfortunately, we don't know how to make it produce more advanced magic stones, nor do we know how to raise it. Half a year later, it was like a plant with broken roots. Its entire body turned yellow and withered to death. After that, the Mystery Exploration Society sent several witches to other devils' towns to investigate. The information they brought back confirmed this point: chaos beasts are the only way to obtain magic stones. The more powerful the stone, the slower the conversion speed. Most of the devils would use magic stones to fight. For example, the mad demons would embed magic stones that could instantly activate the power in their bodies on their arms, giving them powerful long-range attacks. All the magic stones we obtained were seized from our enemies or from their camps. So this stone of flight originally belonged to a demon? Tilly asked curiously. As far as I know, only a powerful demon leader can have such a magic stone. Agatha sighed. It should belong to a transcendent or above as a trophy. What about the types of magic stones? Roland frowned. Do they have magic stones with different abilities from the start? Of course not. If what you said was true, the human race would have been destroyed long ago. She rolled her eyes. During the first battle of Divine Will, most of the demons didn't wear magic stones. They relied on their powerful bodies, heavy armor, and iron spears to attack human cities. This is recorded in the history books. The war lasted for hundreds of years. After that, the human territory was gradually swallowed up until they retreated to the fertile plains. She sighed. At that time, we were closest to victory. If the witches had been the leaders and trained the combat witches, the demons wouldn't have been able to step into the land of dawn. Then they had all kinds of magic stones? Probably. By the time of the second battle of Divine Will, they had more and more tricks up their sleeves, Agatha said gloomily. This time, the war only lasted for 35 years before we were completely defeated. Although the elite blessed army can fight against the lords of hell, the enemy outnumbers us by a lot. According to the seniors of the Union, the witches had the upper hand in the first 10 years. A transcendent could kill their way through the demon's army. But later, we lost more and more people, so we could only defend the city. This time, the prince was silent for a long time, as if he was thinking about something serious. It seems that he finally understands the horror of the demons, Agatha thought. Not only do they have a large number, but they have also made amazing progress. I wonder what kind of army will appear in the next attack. Are those mad demons, fearsome demons, and lords of hell the types that you categorize the demons? Tilly asked while Roland was deep in thought. Yes, these names were spread after the second battle of Divine Will. Before they got magic stones, they didn't have much difference except for their body shape. Then how do they reproduce? Well, Agatha was startled. I don't know. It's not recorded in the books, and I can't find out from the captives that without the red mist, they will die soon. We don't have enough time to understand their language. And the demons that don't need the red mist are basically low-level beasts, so we can't communicate with them. Beasts? Yes, there are many kinds of demons, but they can be divided into two kinds, she explained in detail. One kind has magic power, and the other doesn't. The latter can survive without the red mist, but both their appearance and intelligence are no different from animals. For example, there are 8-legged reptiles that carry goods for the demons, and devil beasts that have wings that can carry demons from the sky. Wait. The prince suddenly raised his eyebrows and said, "Do the devil beasts you mentioned look like this?" He took out a scroll from the drawer and spread it in front of Agatha. This is indeed a devil beast. The two-winged demon on the scroll was beautiful, and there was no doubt that it was the work of a witch. Have you seen this kind of demon? It's not far from here. Roland took a sip of tea. I thought it was a demonic beast that was tamed by the demons. So, they aren't one? Of course not. Low-level demonic beasts are just the demon's food, and the powerful heterogeneous demonic beasts are also the demon's enemies. When the months of demons come, their attacks will often be sharply reduced, and this is also our chance to catch our breath. Agatha paused and changed the topic to the enemies close at hand. If there are devil beasts, it means that there is a devil's camp nearby. Where are they? Just west of the concealing forest, behind a huge snow-capped mountain. Roland roughly described his exploration experience. It's already covered by the red mist. No, not yet. Agatha said excitedly. Those low stone towers are used to maintain the red mist. They will constantly evaporate the liquid stored in them, so they need to be replenished regularly. That's why the demons are hiding underground to reduce consumption as much as possible. We can try to attack this camp. Actively attack the demons? The witches all gasped. If there are demons on guard, it means that there are chaos beasts in the camp. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so few high-level demons in a remote, small camp near the mountains and the sea. She bit her lip. The chaos beasts will always retain the previous type of magic stone. Even if it's not a high-level magic stone, I can use it to continue the research of the Quest Society. Maybe I can find out how the God's Stone of Retaliation transforms. Chapter 357. The group of people stared at her in bewilderment. After a while, the prince cleared his throat and said, "Isn't the red mist extremely corrosive and unapproachable? It only works on witches. According to the research of the Quest Society, ordinary people, animals, and plants can all survive in the red mist, and flames can speed up its dissipation," Agatha said bluntly. "Didn't you say that ordinary people can defeat the demons? Then prove it to me." The winged devil beasts can be lured away by the flying witches. She pointed at Tilly. The rest of us can set up a battle formation in advance, awaken the demons, and wait for them to walk into the trap. If it's really as you said, we can easily swallow this stronghold, right? Roland shook his head with a smile. I didn't tell you before, but this investigation will be completed using hot air balloons, not the flying witches you think. This kind of floating tool can only carry about 10 people at a time. I'm afraid it's impossible to transport ordinary soldiers. And... He paused. The plan you arranged is not reliable. No one knows how many demons are hiding in the ground. Close combat is very likely to cause casualties, and luring the devil beasts is also a dangerous job. I can't let them take the risk. How can there be a perfect plan to fight against the demons? Agatha thought angrily. Every time the blessed army took the initiative to attack, everyone was determined to fight against the demons to the death. He was really lying to her. In order to achieve a goal, casualties were normal. Only people who had never experienced a cruel war would care so much about the life and death of the troops. Although she was disappointed, she still restrained her emotions and did not express her doubts. Everything would be decided after she finished looking at the so-called new weapons in the afternoon. But at this time, Agatha did not have too much hope. An armchair prince, a group of assistant witches, and weak ordinary people, even if the weapons were powerful, how powerful could they be? Perhaps the moment the Union collapsed and dissipated, the human race was already doomed. You mentioned the Battle of Divine Will many times, why do you call it that? Isn't it a war to resist the demon invaders? Roland asked as he changed a piece of paper and picked up the quill. That's what everyone calls it. As for the cause of the war, it's not recorded in the history books. Agatha replied disheartenedly, it's not wrong to call it a war against invaders. The demons did come to the land of dawn through the stone gate. What stone gate? Scroll couldn't help but interrupt. The gates of hell rise from the ground. She sighed. Every time the bloody crimson moon descends, the gates of hell will open and devour the world we live in. This is what the history books say. In short, these damn gates of hell open once every few hundred years. The first demons came to the land of dawn through them and tried to kill us all. The periodicity of the enemy's attacks is also related to this. They need the red mist to survive. If they leave the red mist, they have to carry storage containers such as leather pouches, iron boxes, or jars made of demonic beast shells. This is also the reason why we still have a chance to welcome the second and third Battle of Divine Will. When the stone gates appear, the demons can build obelisks that can produce red mist on their own. These black stone towers are almost taller than mountains and can cover a wide area. One of them can almost cover the entire fertile plains. She said slowly, if the next Battle of Divine Will breaks out, the demons will definitely build obelisks in the center of the fertile plains and turn the plains into their home. Then, they will rely on their camps at the edge of the red mist to attack you. This time, humans have no way out. If that day really comes, we can still hide in the fjords. Tilly shrugged. Are you talking about the islands in the swirling sea? How many people can live on such a small land? They're just waiting in despair for doomsday, Agatha said grumpily. All right, let's be optimistic. At least we have a general understanding of the demons now. The prince spread out his hands and said, when the third Battle of Divine Will begins, we won't be unprepared. Let's call it a day and talk about other things after lunch. After a sumptuous lunch, Agatha followed Vendi back to her room. Life in the barbarian land was more luxurious than she had expected. The variety of dishes and the taste were far better than any of the banquets in her memory. She was probably born during the war years. At that time, whether in her own stone tower or in the Union fortress, the food was mainly bread, jerky, and vegetable soup. But here, there was salt, butter, honey, and some unknown spices. Although she had to pay attention to her image, she could not help but eat the whole plate of grilled mushrooms and 2 large pieces of pepper steak. But the more she did so, the angrier she felt. She hated herself for being unable to resist the temptation of delicious food and shamed the holy city of tequila. But she also felt that the prince was so short-sighted that he still had the leisure to enjoy delicious food at such a critical time. He did not know that humans were going to die soon. I'm already familiar with the way in the castle, she said stiffly. Next time, you don't have to bring me back. It's not troublesome, I'm very happy to do it. Vendi said with a smile. And if you have something to say, you can talk to me. Keeping it in your heart will only make you feel more depressed. Didn't he say that he would take me to see the new weapon test in the afternoon? Why did he leave the parlor alone after lunch? Do you mean His Highness Roland? Well, I think His Highness is going to take a nap. Vendi covered her mouth. This is his habit. He usually sleeps for an hour at noon. His Highness often says that the body is the capital of work. Without adequate rest, one cannot be competent for the job of a lord. Nap, what kind of habit is this? Isn't one night enough for him to sleep? Agatha thought angrily. This is obviously an excuse made by a lazy person, but you actually believe it. Ordinary witches and senior awakened ones. Why do you trust him so much? She took a deep breath. just because he gave you a safe place to live? Do you really believe that he can defeat the devil? No, even if he can defeat the church that oppresses you? I don't know what the other sisters think, Vendi said softly. But I believe him. Because His Highness can make things that others can't imagine, or dare not imagine, into reality. For me, it's a miracle. Miracles? When the witches were being hunted and chased, he saved the Witch Cooperation Association. When everyone saw us as demons, he created a territory where witches and mortals can coexist. In just 1 year, His Highness relied on an army composed of civilians to resist the invasion of demonic beasts, and defeated the Duke of Rhine, whose territory was several times larger than his. Even the mad army of the Grey Castle Kingdom couldn't take a step into the western region. But these are only battles between mortals, completely different from the God's punishment army and the devil. Agatha shook her head. Of course, it's not just these, Vendi continued. The knowledge and ideas he imparted made the abilities of the four sisters evolve. He not only created powerful machines, but also weapons that can make a knight, or even an ordinary person, defeat an extraordinary witch. These are all miracles that I can see. They don't come from the tavern epics, nor do they come from the legends in the books. They all happen around me. One day, he will become the king of Grey Castle and lead us to defeat any enemy. Her eyes were smiling, but her voice was full of confidence. I believe so. Chapter 358. A weapon that can allow ordinary people to defeat an extraordinary. After Vendi left, Agatha had been thinking about this sentence. Do they really know what an extraordinary is? It was a pity that she did not have a stone of measuring, otherwise she would be able to clearly understand the magic power and types of these people. Just when she was about to lose her patience, Nightingale appeared at the door of her room. His Highness invites you to watch the new weapon test, if you don't want to go. I'll go, she said in a low voice. Please lead the way. Seeing the drowsy and yawning Prince Roland, Agatha suddenly had the urge to throw ice on his face to wake him up. However, this kind of behavior could easily cause misunderstandings from other witches, so she could only think about it in her heart. After leaving the castle, it was the first time that she saw the whole town during the day. Against the background of the heavy snow, the first thing that leaped into her mind was the neat and tidy double-story houses that stood side by side. Their shapes and sizes were exactly the same, and their white outlines and red brick roofs were particularly harmonious. The black streets were all straight, dividing the town into squares of similar size. Looking from a close distance, the scenery was completely a cycle of buildings, trees, streets, trees, and streets, as if they were layered on top of each other. Even the inner city of Tequila could not be so neat and orderly. But what made her feel that she had made a comeback was that, apart from the castle, there were no other buildings in this town that were worth a second glance. Even the castle itself, in terms of grandeur, was far inferior to the Quest Tower of Tequila. After all, it was just a small town. Agatha snorted disdainfully in her heart and turned to look at Nightingale. How many people live here? Well, at first there were only more than 2,000 people, but now with the refugees from the north and south, there are nearly 30,000 people. 2,000 people dared to say that they could defeat the demons. It was simply an idiot. Wait, 30,000? Agatha's eyes widened. Tequila at its peak could only accommodate 50,000 people, but this palm-sized place actually had 30,000 residents? Could it be that she included the population of the surrounding villages as well? Although these square brick houses seemed to be able to accommodate more residents than the wooden bungalows, the increase in residents was not as simple as the accumulation of numbers. Once the population exceeded a certain limit, the demand on the city would increase exponentially. First of all, the demand for food and water had increased significantly. Secondly, the expansion of the shantytown and slums had led to the deterioration of public security. Finally, even the disposal of feces had become a thorny problem. At the end of the Second Battle of Divine Will, Tequila had encountered such a problem. As the major cities fell one after another, the number of people pouring into the holy city increased rapidly. Not only did the city not strengthen its defense, but it also almost paralyzed the entire city. The situation was only stabilized when the Union forcibly cleared out a group of refugees. Because she had experienced it herself, Agatha knew the difficulty of expanding the population of a city. Looking at Nightingale's casual expression, she was skeptical. Maybe Nightingale didn't know the answer and was just fooling her. In the future, it would be better to ask Vendi for such questions. She thought that at least Vendi's attitude seemed more sincere. Passing through the crowded streets, Agatha followed the prince and the others up a section of the city wall that was built with mud. This kind of low wall was not towering or sturdy at all. There were no barbs buried in the wall, and there was no moat around it. The demons did not even need construction equipment. They could climb up on their own. The disappointment in her heart increased by a notch. Every 100 steps or so, there was a relatively wide platform that protruded from the front and back of the wall. It seemed that it was left for the installation of the ballistae. After walking along the top of the wall for a short while, Agatha soon saw the object of the test. The shape of the weapon was so special that it was difficult for people to ignore its existence. It was a long metal tubular object. It looked a bit like an iron spear that had been enlarged several times, but it did not have a spear tip. It was smooth all over and looked silver gray. It did not seem to be made of iron. The components at the end of the long tube were more complicated. In addition to the fixed bracket, there were two shorter tubes attached to the main tube. There were neither ropes nor arrow grooves. From its appearance, it did not seem to be a large ballistae or a catapult. But she also had not figured out how to use this thing to attack the enemy. This is Border Town's latest weapon, the 152mm Stronghold Standard Artillery, a symbol of justice and glory. The prince raised his hand and said, compared to the 12-pound field artillery, it has many improvements and all kinds of indicators are outstanding. It can definitely be called an epoch-making weapon. Agatha could not help but frown. What justice and glory? Stronghold Standard Artillery? It sounds very frivolous. The following series of introductions seemed to be incomparably awkward. They were completely made-up words. Is he really the knowledgeable and multi-talented prince that Vendi talked about? Is he really the prince who is deeply trusted by the witches? Clap, clap, clap. Nightingale was the only one who applauded. The atmosphere seemed a bit stiff for a moment. Ahem, Roland cleared his throat. Then let's cut the crap and start the test. Iron Axe, start. Yes, Your Highness. 3 people dressed in the same uniform immediately moved. Agatha stood to the side and stared at each of these people's movements, hoping to figure out the operating principle of this weapon. She saw one person slide down the iron block at the end of the long tube. Another person immediately inserted an orange-yellow pointed object into the tube, and then closed the iron block. Reporting, the preparation is complete. We can fire. Everyone cover your ears. The prince demonstrated and nodded. Fire. Wait, they're ready so quickly. Agatha was just about to open her mouth to ask when a loud bang suddenly exploded in her ears. Her head suddenly buzzed, and the surroundings suddenly became quiet. The front end of the long metal tube erupted with an orange-red flame. It was dazzling and short-lived. At that moment, she felt the powerful force contained in the flame. The wall under her feet seemed to tremble. A wave of heat hit her face, and her body almost couldn't stand and took 2 steps back. The cannon itself suddenly sank back, but it quickly returned to its original position. Nightingale supported her from behind and seemed to be saying something, but she could only faintly hear the faint intermittent voice, as if it came from a very far place. It was not until the buzzing gradually subsided that her hearing returned to normal. Are you all right? She shook her head and looked at the empty snowfield in front of her, but she didn't see any change. Was this flame just to scare the enemy? Did you see where it landed? The prince asked a witch with green hair beside him. It hit behind a small hill. The closest one is the red flag. The latter observed for a while. But it's still a lot farther. The red flag? Agatha looked at Roland in confusion. What are they talking about? Fortunately, the prince quickly answered her doubts. This weapon can be used to shoot the cannonball like a crossbow. It's used to hit the enemy that's still far away. In order to observe the range of the cannonball, I asked lightning to put down colored flags every 1 kilometer. The red flag is the last one, and it's set up 5 kilometers away. He explained, according to the size you're familiar with, 1 kilometer is almost more than 300 feet, which is close to a distance of 1 kilometer. Agatha froze on the spot. Did the other party mean that it had just thrown the bolt it had stuffed into it 5 kilometers away? Obviously, there are no ropes or power accumulators. How did it do that? One had to know that even siege beasts that relied on mana only had a maximum range of 3 to 4 kilometers. If he wasn't lying, as long as they build a tall and thick city wall with this weapon, they can effectively stop the demon's attack. But, it's not easy to shoot a weapon with such an amazing range. I can't see where the cannonball will land. I always feel that something is missing. The prince touched his chin. Next, I'll test 3 rapid shots to attack close targets. Chapter 359. When the second shot was fired, Agatha covered her ears in advance. Then she saw an incredible scene. There was no long charging work as she had expected. The long metal tube, which seemed to be huge, showed a lightness that was completely inconsistent with its size. Every shot seemed to shake the earth, but the base did not move at all, as if the two had nothing to do with each other. Every time the long tube retreated and repositioned, it was fast and accurate. This process did not even require human control. Only 3 of the 4 operators were busy, and the commander called Iron Axe just stood aside and gave orders. She removed the metal block, slid down the copper shell, inserted a new bolt, and fired again. Repeating this cycle, Agatha could feel the earth-shattering fury of thunder almost every 10 breaths, and the close-range shooting also allowed her to witness the continuous snow pillars and mud princes from 2 miles away. Agatha was not lying. This weapon had indeed fired the bolt, and the speed was so fast that it could not be seen with the naked eye. Judging from the time it took to fire the snow pillars, even a transcendent would not be able to avoid its attack. Agatha looked at this silver-white long-barreled weapon and could not help but be a little stunned. If the tequila had such a powerful weapon at that time, they might have been able to stop all the terrible demons under the city wall, so that the city wall would not have been destroyed and they would not have fallen into the quagmire of a war of attrition. Is this a weapon made by witches? After a while, she swallowed and asked in a low voice. Judging from its smooth and shiny appearance, it was by no means made by the hands and hammers of mortals. But the prince's answer greatly surprised her. It's a masterpiece of witches and mortals, he said with a smile. The Longsong cannon was made by witches from smelting to casting, and the cannonballs were fired by alchemists. By the way, except for Anna, the witches who participated in the production are what you call assistant witches. Agatha suddenly felt a crack in her long-formed concept. She had thought she was tolerant enough to mortals, and was even ostracized by the Quest Society because of this. But now it seemed that what she had done was far from enough. Was the Union wrong from the beginning to the end? Could it be that what the prince said was right, that mortals could defeat demons? But if the cooperation between witches and mortals could produce such a powerful force, why did the first battle of Divine Will end in a fiasco? Questions constantly emerged in her mind, and Agatha felt extremely confused. When the Longsong cannons continued to spew out flames, Tilly was equally shocked. Although she had witnessed the scene of the cannons bombarding the demonic beasts on the city wall, the shortcomings of those firearms were also very obvious. It was difficult to hit the demonic beasts from a distance, and it was impossible to attack them from a close distance. They could only exert their full power from a medium distance. However, the reloading speed was relatively slow. When dealing with the agile hybrid demonic beasts, it was very likely that the enemy would have already rushed to the foot of the city wall before the fire was ignited. In addition, In order to quickly load and fire, a cannon team needed 5 to 10 people to operate. As long as there was a problem in one link, it would affect the operation of the weapon. Furthermore, someone had to look after the source of the fire when igniting the fire. When the heavy rain came, the field artillery might not be able to play any role. However, Roland's newly developed long-song cannon did not have these shortcomings. Charging from the rear could make the muzzle lower than the breech, which greatly increased the short-range shooting range, and the firing speed was several times higher. However, the number of people was reduced to 3. At the same time, there was no need for open fire, which meant that it could be used in bad weather. In addition, the attack range was far greater than that of a catapult. It was completely worthy of the word epoch-making weapon mentioned by Roland. Although it could only be produced by witches at present, Tilly believed that this was only a temporary situation. Sylvie's observation could be used as proof. The continuous firing weapon that used to be equipped with only the chief knight had now been distributed to every soldier. Anna only needed to make a batch of specialized equipment to produce the weapon, and the specific casting and assembly could be done by the workers themselves. Looking at the expressions of Ashes and Andrea, she knew that the long-song cannon was also an unimaginable thing for them. It was really a good thing to have such an ally, but as an elder brother, she felt that he was even more distant. She even felt that he was far ahead of her. This feeling made Tilly feel slightly disappointed. If only he could be a little more honest. Roland's heart ached when he saw that the shells that he had painstakingly gathered were used up in the blink of an eye. Even so, he still had to pretend to be unfathomable in order to conceal the reluctance in his heart. This was not a real test of the new cannon. In order to achieve a smooth demonstration effect, he asked Iron Axe to transfer a team of elite artillerymen from the artillery battalion. They started the simulated shooting practice a few days in advance, during which they also conducted 2 live shots. This time, it was just a show of power for the witches. The shooting process was very smooth, and the result was also ideal. At least from Agatha's shocked expression, the performance of the cannon was beyond her imagination. However, for Roland, the live shooting effect of the long-song cannon was far from satisfactory. Except for the sacred caliber of 152 mm, the other parts were far from the real 152 mm. With Anna's precision processing ability, Lucia's element purification, and finally Sylvie's metal flaw detection, in theory, he could produce a real modern mature cannon, not a replica with a range of only 7 or 8 kilometers. The key was in the details. From the looks of it, its medicine room was too small. Considering the weight of the fixed shell, Roland deliberately reduced the volume of the chamber, which led to the lack of charge. Although it had a slender barrel with a diameter of 40 times, the range was still not ideal. The other problem was the propellant. Because the nitroglycerin was still in the trial, the shells were all filled with nitrocotton, which was also the reason why Roland was distressed. The nitrocotton consumed by several shells was enough to fill thousands of bullets. In addition, the smokeless propellant was not gelatinized, which was equivalent to further reducing the charge. Finally, the shell itself was still an enlarged version of the bullet. The warhead was not charged, and its lethality was completely based on kinetic energy. If it missed the target, it would mean 0 damage. At present, it could only be used to attack some slow enemies. In short, there was still a long way to go to achieve the scene of covering the whole area with bullets and cannons. However, Roland felt that he might not have as much time as he initially expected. Since he knew that the transformation of the magic stone originated from the demons, the warning in his heart became more and more intense. If the demons also had their own technology, would there also be a phenomenon of technological advancement in a certain period of time? Chapter 360. This was not a wild guess. The history of human civilization was the best proof. It took humans nearly 1,000,000 years to go from the Stone Age to the Iron Age, but it only took 3,200 years to go from the Iron Age to the Steam Age. It only took 150 years to go from the Steam Age to the Electric Age, and another 50 years to go from the Steam Age to the Information Age. From the information revealed by Agatha, it was known that the demons were not the same. More than 800 years ago, they fought in a similar way to humans. They fought in close combat with bronze and iron swords and shields. Some senior demons even wore God's stones of retaliation to fight against witches. In every siege, when faced with long-range weapons such as crossbows and catapults, the demons basically could not come up with any effective countermeasures. They often had to pay a heavy price to conquer a strong city. If not for their inborn strength, humans would have won the first battle of divine will. However, during the second battle of divine will, the demons had already developed the ability to mass-produce magic stones, and their species had also been divided. Different forms of demons were responsible for different combat tasks, and even the mad demons, who were numerous in number, had developed long-range attacks. According to Agatha, they had even developed transportation tools and engineering machines powered by magic stones. Now that another 400 years had passed, what had they evolved into? Roland thought that Agatha could bring him the magic stone technology of the Tequila Quest Society and open up a new path of industrial development. He did not expect this technology to come from the enemy. In this way, the battle with the demons would probably turn into a war between industrial technology and magic stone technology. Whoever developed faster would be the one to win in the end. Roland could not help but sigh. It seemed that he needed to have a good talk with Tilly. After dinner, Roland waited for Tilly Wimbledon in his office. Seeing that she came alone, he felt relieved. At least in terms of trust, they had made great progress. "I heard from Nightingale that you have something to discuss with me," she said directly after sitting down. "That's right." Roland personally poured a cup of tea and handed it to her. "The main thing is how to deal with the third battle of divine will and our future." Tilly took the teacup and blinked, as if waiting for him to continue. "From Agatha's words, we know that the Four Kingdoms are just a corner of the Land of Dawn. Even the barbarian land used to be a prosperous and fertile plain. Humans had been defeated by the demons twice, so they had no choice but to retreat to this place. According to the opening time of the Stone Gate, the third battle of divine will is not far away." Roland hesitated for a moment, then said bluntly, "I hope you can stay." Tilly was slightly startled, then she could not help but chuckle. "I didn't expect you to say this. It's hard to predict the strength of the demons. We must gather all the strength we can to have a chance to win the war." Although Agatha said that the first battle of divine will was fought by the cooperation of mortals and witches, it's very likely that it's just a superficial cooperation. There's no essential difference from the second battle of divine will. He said in a sincere tone, "As you can see, the additional memories in my mind are weapons that can defeat the demons. Once the things in the memories are transformed into entities, even mortals can burst out with unimaginable power. Witches are responsible for operating the war machine, and ordinary people should be the right choice to participate in the war. When the war is coming, every additional person is equal to an additional force." Tilly took a sip of tea and did not answer for a long time, which made Roland feel anxious. However, it was useless to be anxious at this time, so he pretended to be calm and quietly waited for her to speak. After about a quarter of an hour, Tilly sighed and broke the silence. "If I stay, what will happen to the witches on Sleeping Island?" "Does that mean she agrees?" Roland suppressed his excitement and said, "Let them all come to Border Town, this place can accept them. I'll specially designate a territory for your witches to live in, and everyone will be treated the same as in the Witch Union. I don't want to put them all into the Witch Union, they will still be led by you, which is equivalent to establishing an autonomous special district in the Western region. This will not only facilitate cooperation, but also enhance mutual understanding. All of them will be treated the same." She could not help but chuckle. "You don't dislike their ability, you know, most of them can't fight for you." "No, no." Roland waved his hand repeatedly. "Under the cooperation model I envision, the assistant witches can play a greater role than the combat witches, because they don't strengthen themselves, but tens of thousands of ordinary people. There is no lack of power in nature, only people who discover and use power. In this regard, the assistant witches are much more capable. So, This is your real purpose?" she asked slyly. "Ah. It's indeed a generous offer." Tilly smiled and shook her head. "Officially, I can't refuse to fight against the demon's invasion with you. Privately, I also want to stay here and learn interesting knowledge, but I can't promise you now." Roland was startled and asked subconsciously, "Why?" "Since I'm the leader elected by the witches of Sleeping Island, I can't decide their future based on personal preferences. Once they move to the western region, this organization will inevitably lose its independence, and if there are any changes at that time, they won't be able to resist. If one day we have a conflict in the future, will all the witches pack up and return to Sleeping Island again?" "No, how could I possibly?" "I can't pin their future on verbal promises," Tilly interrupted. "If you were me, would you hand over everything to the other party simply because you are an ally?" Roland was suddenly stunned. He did not need to think about the answer. If he was faced with such a choice, he would never easily agree to it. Most of the time, the closer they were to each other, the easier it was to have a conflict. This was the reason why the so-called distant friends attack the nearby enemies. It was the same between forces, and it was the same even between lovers. "See, your concerns are the same as mine. But, you're my sister, I won't hurt you." Roland had to make a last effort. "Is that so? But I still can't believe the reasons you gave me." Tilly closed her eyes sadly. "Maybe this is also the reason why I can't immediately agree to you." She paused and seemed to want to put these thoughts aside. "For now, let's get along as allies. I'll fully support the construction of Border Town. If you need a witch, I'll try my best to meet your requirements. If it's really difficult to resist the demon's attack, you can return to Sleeping Island and live a peaceful life. This is all I can do for now." Chapter 361. The fire in the fireplace flickered twice and gradually dimmed. Nightingale appeared and added a few more pieces of firewood into the fireplace. There was a crackling sound in the fireplace and the flames suddenly brightened. Roland looked at the elongated shadow of the cup and let out a deep breath. Tilly had been gone for a long time. He had been thinking about their conversation to see if there was any way to change the result, but in the end, he did not find the answer. Trust was a very strange thing. Apart from investing time, other methods had little effect. "So there are things that you can't do." Nightingale patted the dust off her hands and walked over to sit in her usual seat. "What did you say to her that day?" "A white lie." Roland leaned back in the chair. "It's normal that she doesn't want to believe it." He paused. "You said you had a younger brother. If he suddenly became very different from before and emphasized that he was still the same person, would you believe him?" "You mean the guy who looked innocent but betrayed me the moment he turned around?" Nightingale curled her lips. "In my opinion, he was basically no different from a mutation." "Well, I shouldn't have mentioned this." "It doesn't matter. I've already left the Guylan family." "They're just strangers," she said disapprovingly. "She and I were like strangers too." Roland sighed. "Or rather, I didn't get along well with everyone in the palace." "If you're annoyed, you can tell me." Nightingale smiled. "I've always been very curious about the life in the palace. I also want to know how bad your personality was at that time. You could let your terrible reputation spread to Silver City. To be honest, I was much worse than I am now." Roland could not help but curl the corner of his mouth. He picked out a few things from his memory and said, "She probably started to hate me from the moment I threw her into the glass. It's really terrible." She clicked her tongue. "But I think, she doesn't hate you now." "Oh." Roland raised his eyebrows. "You even know this?" "Of course, didn't she say a few words?" "Personally, I also want to stay here and learn interesting knowledge," Nightingale mimicked. It sounded like words of comfort, but the truth is that she wasn't lying when she said it. If he really hated this place as much as he did in the past, he wouldn't want to stay here. "Are you comforting me?" Roland laughed. If telling the truth counts, she shrugged, and I think it's good to keep the status quo. Why? She promised to give priority to providing witches for Border Town and support you in fighting against the demons, so it doesn't matter if she's here or not. If all the witches from Sleeping Island come in at once, and there are a few more like ashes, I will be very busy. Nightingale threw a piece of dried fish into her mouth and muttered, "Not everyone is as obedient as Maggie." Roland could not help but laugh. From what you said, you seem to have caused trouble for Ashes. Ah. No, why would I? Nightingale waved her hand. I just watched her occasionally to prevent her from harming the members of the Witch Union. Really? She tilted her head and whistled. I don't know if it's an illusion. Roland stared at her and said, "Why do I always feel that you're actually very happy after I was rejected?" That's an illusion, Nightingale said with certainty. Then she looked in the direction of the door and said, "Well, someone's coming." She disappeared after saying this. Is this the cicada's escape plan? Just as he was thinking about this, there was a knock on the office door. Roland was greatly surprised. It was almost midnight, and there was still someone coming. He replaced the candle on the candlestick and said, "Come in." It was Agatha who opened the door. The prince could not help but be surprised. What's the matter? She walked to the round stool in front of the table and sat down without saying a word. I heard from Ms. Vendy that whether it is the flintlock that can restrain the extraordinary or the artillery with amazing range, they all originated from your ideas. And the principles and production methods of these things are all recorded in the books you wrote? Do you mean natural science theoretical foundation and elementary chemistry? There are indeed relevant principles in them, but as for the production methods, they were not written due to space constraints. Roland said, "After all, these are only elementary theory textbooks. You came here to ask me about this? Only members of the Witch Union can learn this knowledge, right?" She did not answer, but continued to ask. Roland nodded, he had already guessed what she wanted to say. "Then I applied to join the Witch Union," Agatha said almost without pausing. "But the Witch Union belongs to Border Town. Are you sure you want to work for the town?" He asked curiously. "Its lord is not a transcendent, but just an ordinary mortal. You can create weapons that can fight against the demons, so you can't be regarded as an ordinary mortal. Even the Quest Society will have a place for you." Agatha paused for a moment. "As long as you don't harm the witches and don't become enemies with the survivors of the Union, I don't mind cooperating with a mortal." It was probably a little difficult for her to say that working for a mortal was temporarily, but Roland was impressed by Agatha's ability to accept. Perhaps people engaged in research were always able to quickly accept new things. He held back his laughter. "I thought you would follow Tilly to Sleeping Island, which is a city built by witches. It's just a refuge to escape from the church's pursuit." She shook her head. "I've already asked them about the situation before I made this decision, and I've seen too many cities ruled by witches before I was frozen, but now they've all been buried in the dust. It's meaningless if we don't defeat the demons. I hope to see the hope of victory here." "You will," Roland nodded. "But I can't guarantee that you won't become enemies with the Union. Because it may not have disappeared, but changed its name to hide itself." "What?" Agatha was stunned. "I've carefully thought about what you said. Even if they fail and escape from Tequila, the Union still has transcendence and a group of blessed warriors. In this undeveloped area full of indigenous people, it's unlikely that they will be completely cut off from the news, unless they want to do so." Roland said in a low voice, "The Church is probably the incarnation of the Union. It's not the mortals who took away the power and the manufacturing method of the gods' punishment army from the witches, but the witches themselves who turned the Union into an organization that hunts witches. In this way, it's more convenient for them to create a large number of gods' punishment army." "You mean, the current tragic situation of the witches being oppressed and hunted is all caused by the Union?" she asked incredulously. "I'm not sure, it's just a speculation." Roland stood up and walked to the bookshelf. He took out a few thick black books and handed them to her. These books contain the chronicles written by the church themselves, as well as the histories of the four kingdoms recorded by astrologers. You can refer to them. No matter what, the church is now our enemy, and also a target that we must destroy in the future. If you decide to stand on the side of the witches and fight against the demons with me, the Witch Union welcomes you. Chapter 362. Early the next morning, Agatha received a delicate parchment scroll from Roland. What's this? A contract. After you put your thumbprint on it, you'll officially be a member of the Witch Union. She unrolled the scroll and read the contents in detail. She was surprised and asked, "That's it?" The prince did not seem to understand what she meant. What do you mean? The restrictions on it are meaningless. Agatha pointed to the content of the contract. It only mentions that you can't betray Border Town unless you violate the agreement between the two parties, but there are no restrictive measures. If you really want to betray us, I'm afraid there won't be any psychological pressure. And the wording on it is too loose. Is this really a contract? Well, I wrote it casually at that time. It's just a formality. The prince nodded and did not seem surprised. It seemed that he was not the first person to point out that there was something wrong with this contract. A form full of loopholes. She secretly criticized, poked the ink pad, and put her thumbprint on it. The union contract had very few requirements for both parties. According to the terms on it, she would not feel any changes after joining. Although she felt that it was unnecessary, she also felt a lot more relaxed. Although she said that she was cooperating with mortals, she knew that the gray-haired man was the actual leader of the Witch Union. If she had to serve a mortal respectfully like she did with the higher-ups of the Union or the lords of the three cities, she was afraid that it would be difficult for her to accept. Now it seemed that at least she had a considerable amount of freedom. Roland put away the parchment scroll and asked curiously, "What are the restrictions on the contract in Tequila?" "This is needed when recruiting mortals. It can range from physical punishment to mental torture." She curled her lips. "As for us, we don't need to sign such a thing. The union is a lifetime contract. Once you join, the only road for defectors is death." "Well." He took a breath. "Welcome to the Witch Union. Remember to come to the castle garden after breakfast. I need to test your ability comprehensively." The process of testing the ability was simpler than Agatha had imagined. She just had to demonstrate the various characteristics of her ability in front of the prince and answer a few questions. The magic power is in the form of a sky-blue pentagonal prism. Its capacity is medium. The type is summoning, and the ability has already evolved once. The initial effect is to create low temperatures, and after the evolution, it can solidify at room temperature. It's a very convenient ability. Roland finished recording and asked, "How did you evolve your ability?" "Constant practice and an epiphany," she said proudly. As the youngest High awakened, everyone in the Union called her the genius of Tequila. Every day I tried to lower the temperature so that the water could freeze faster. Until one day, I saw a witch who could control flames melt a piece of lead cake into liquid. As the flame continued to roast it, the lead liquid began to boil. This scene made me realize that perhaps everything has three states: gas, liquid, and solid. Lead is solid at room temperature, but as long as the temperature is high enough, it can also turn into gas. Water is liquid at room temperature, but when the temperature drops, it will solidify into ice. Then the gas that appears to be in the gas state at room temperature, will it be like lead? As long as the temperature is low enough, it can also be frozen. With this idea in mind, I quickly felt the magic power in my body had a completely different change. Finally, I was promoted to a High Witch, and this epiphany was also recorded in the general principles of the 10,000 laws. As a matter of fact, she was the youngest person to be included in the book. At that time, even the three chiefs praised her. They believed that this epiphany was not only a great inspiration for witches' promotion, but also had great significance for real research. However, when she said this solemnly, Roland's expression was quite calm. I see. The prince nodded. What is the general principles of the 10,000 laws? Wait, aren't you surprised? Agatha was surprised. This world is full of gas. It seems ethereal and weightless, but in fact, it can become flowing water or frozen ice. It's a very normal phenomenon. There are many kinds of gas, and each has a different boiling and melting point. Roland shrugged. Why should I be surprised? This is common knowledge in the general principles of natural science. Agatha suddenly felt a little stuffy in her chest. She took 2 deep breaths. Well, I'll study this book carefully. What about the general principles of the 10,000 laws? It's a record of the evolution of all the High Awakened's abilities, she said grumpily. But the abilities of witches are originally different, and it's difficult to achieve promotion through imitation and reference. Naturally, it's not as good as your general principles of natural science. Did I say something wrong? The prince looked puzzled. No, I'm too arrogant. Agatha felt even more depressed. Ahem. He probably noticed her displeasure, so he changed the topic. You just said that the abilities of witches are different. Among the thousands of witches in the Union, there's no one with the same ability. No, she replied stiffly. The Quest Society believes that the form of magic determines the ability, but no witch's magic form is exactly the same. But when you saw Anna before, you thought it was a flame ability at first glance. This is just a common classification, simple and easy to understand. The ability to emit light and heat can be called the flame type, but with the growth of magic, the solidification of adulthood, or the advanced awakening, the seemingly identical ability will undergo great changes. Even if it's the initial stage of the flame, some witches are good at controlling the temperature, some witches are better at controlling the fire, and some witches can throw it out. Even if you can't see the difference for the time being, it's caused by poor observation methods. Agatha said, the Quest Society's classification method is more formal, and generally speaking, it's similar to your classification method. There are also 3 types. Roland asked. For types, the main difference is the summoning type. The Quest Society divides it into 2 types, one is called magic energy, and the other is called shaping. You should be able to understand the difference from the literal meaning. Magic energy refers to the type of summoning that requires continuous consumption of magic power like Anna's, and will disappear once the magic power is exhausted, while shaping is the type of summoning that can exist for a long time like Soroya's painting. Although I don't know what Soroya's ability is, it's more or less the same. Summoning that can exist for a long time can be regarded as shaping, such as my room temperature solidification. I see. Roland also recorded these contents. That's all for today's test. As usual, when I don't give you any tasks, you can practice your ability on your own, but I think there's someone who might urgently need your help. Who? The chief alchemist of Border Town, Kyle Sichi. Chapter 363. According to the literature on the street, the most important part of large-scale production of nitroglycerin was temperature control. The large amount of heat released during the reaction could easily cause sensitive explosives to explode. As long as the temperature of the large reaction vessel was kept constant, it could safely produce nitroglycerin in batches. During the laboratory test, ice could be used to cool it down, but when it came to large-scale production, it was a bit inadequate. The heat absorption effect of the ice-water mixture was limited, and when a large amount of heat was released, the cooling rate was slow, and it consumed itself quickly, making it very troublesome. But Agatha's ice coffin could easily produce a temperature of nearly 100 degrees below zero, which was undoubtedly an excellent guarantee for cooling the vessel. Roland didn't know whether this information was reliable or not, but it didn't prevent him from testing it one by one. Even if there was an accident, there was still Nana as the last insurance. Back to the office, he wrote a letter of introduction and gave it to the guard, asking the latter to take Agatha to the chemistry laboratory and deliver the letter to Kyle Sichi. In the letter, In addition to introducing Agatha's ability, he also fabricated a noble identity that she was born in an upper-class family, but accidentally drifted to this place, so that the alchemist could control his temper and treat this witch who could bring great help to the chemistry experiment. After the guard left, Roland was still a little worried. Kyle was a straightforward person, and Agatha was an ancient witch who thought highly of herself, so he hoped that they wouldn't quarrel. Just as he was thinking about whether he should go to the laboratory later, Scroll opened the door and walked in. "Your Royal Highness, the results of the second batch of the Universal Education Assessment have come out," she said with a smile. "This time there are a total of 762 people who passed, half of them are adults." So many. Roland was happy. Compared with the first batch of more than 50 children from Car Academy, this time half of the adults graduated, which meant that the evening training had achieved results, and also verified the feasibility of a series of teaching programs formulated by the Ministry of Education for the large difference in progress, different study times, and other situations. "Yes, you have been promoting universal education for almost half a year, and this batch of students are generally under 25 years old, so mastering the basic reading and writing is not too difficult." It probably had something to do with the writing itself. If it were Chinese, it would not have been so fast. Roland thought, although he always felt that this earthworm-like writing was as awkward as it could be. He had no idea how far he could go when he started to implement universal education. After all, this was the first time something like this had happened in Greycastle. There were no precedents. In accordance with the principle of encouragement and subsidies, he discussed with Scroll for a long time, and developed an education program that would set up classes for minors during the day and classes for workers at night, supplemented by a series of incentive policies to entice workers to come and learn. So far, the effect was actually quite good. Of course, all of this was inseparable from Scroll's responsible management. "You've worked hard." Roland nodded. "It is my honor to serve you, Your Highness." She bowed slightly. As the oldest witch in the Witch Union, it was difficult for Roland to compare her with little girls like Anna and Lightning. Scroll always gave him the feeling that she was not in a hurry, and she was always clear. When discussing problems, she would quietly listen to his ideas, but also straightforwardly point out his mistakes. Sometimes, he even felt like a junior in front of her. Perhaps, she was born to be a teacher. Roland smiled and shook his head, putting these thoughts aside. In short, now that there was a new batch of fresh troops, some of the long-prepared factories could finally start operating. "Please help me call Berev over," he said excitedly. The City Hall supervisor quickly rushed to the castle. Since he started building the city, his workload had increased day by day. Not only did the number of blank areas on his forehead increase, but he also had a few more wrinkles. However, he didn't look tired or sleepy at all. Instead, he looked more and more energetic. "Your Highness, are you looking for me about the job recruitment?" The supervisor probably knew about the new batch of graduates in Border Town, so he took the initiative to ask. "Yes," Roland nodded. Taking advantage of this year's early months of demons, Timothy can't harass the western region. "I want to expand the size of the army in Border Town to cope with the next year's war, and at the same time, expand the number of people in the existing factories." "And City Hall," he quickly added. "After the city is built, your territory will be 5 to 6 times larger than it is now. City Hall personnel will also have to be expanded to a corresponding scale to manage such a vast land." "Rest assured," the prince smiled. "I won't forget you." He took out a piece of paper and said while writing, "Among the new batch of more than 700 graduates, the City Hall will provide 20% of the jobs, the acid factory will take 40%, and the rest will be absorbed by the steam engine factory and bicycle factory. The bicycle factory needs at least 100 people. The salary will be set according to the previous standard, but the acid factory can be slightly raised to fill the required number as soon as possible. As for the soap factory and perfume factory, the main work was done by witches. Ordinary people only needed to repeat a few simple steps, and they didn't need to be literate to be competent, so they weren't included. Roland believed that education could not only improve a person's knowledge and vision, but also improve his sense of responsibility and sociability. This was the significance of enlightenment. This was also why a large number of people who had received primary education were needed in advanced factories. A worker with social attributes would understand the importance of cooperation, altruism, and self-awareness better than an illiterate person. This was crucial for a complex process with many steps of fine work. Yes, Your Highness, Barav responded. How many people do we need to expand the army? At least 1,000 people. Open the recruitment to newly promoted civilians and Eastern Region refugees, Roland ordered. As in the past, the City Hall will release a notice, and the First Army will be responsible for the review and recruitment. 1,000 people? Barav was startled. This is equivalent to the current total number of people in the First Army, Your Highness. If they are all equipped with materials and weapons according to the specifications of the First Army, the cost will not be low. I've considered all these, so let's do it. Now that he knew the crisis of the demon's invasion was imminent, he naturally couldn't plan slowly like before. In addition to bringing the entire Western region under his rule, the first thing to do next spring was to completely defeat Timothy. As long as he eliminated this opposing regime, even if he didn't occupy other areas, the new Western region would become a veritable king's city. At that time, whether it was the expansion of the population or the promotion of trade, he would be able to do whatever he wanted, unlike now where he was restricted in every aspect. However, he didn't need to disclose these plans to Barav for the time being. He only needed to arrange the financial distribution and material distribution for himself. After the City Hall supervisor left, the guard brought a piece of news. Marjorie's caravan had arrived. Chapter 364. At the pier, more than 10 sailboats were lined up in a line. The top of the mast and the crisscrossed hemp ropes had been wrapped into a white-silver thread by the snow. The refugees filed out of the cabins and rushed to the open space in front of the pier. This was not the first time that Border Town had received refugees from all over Greycastle. The whole process was orderly. For iron railings divided the crowd into two slender lines, which could control the flow of people and avoid trampling. On both sides of the railings were patrolling policemen holding short sticks. Anyone who pushed or tried to climb over the railings would be hit with a stick. There were punishments and rewards. In order to appease the people who had gone through hardships to arrive here, the refugees who passed through the railings were given a bowl of steaming porridge. In any case, filling their stomachs could effectively reduce the refugees' panic and discomfort towards the unfamiliar territory. This time, in addition to the police, the First Army, and City Hall officials, Nightingale and Sylvie also participated in the inspection in order to find out the drug users that Timothy had planted in the crowd. Under the scrutiny of the Eye of Magic, no matter if it was pills or snow powder, there was no place to hide. Thank you for everything you've done for the Western region. Roland withdrew his gaze and said to Marjorie beside him, if it weren't for your fleet, I'm afraid these people would have to spend the winter in the slums of other cities. It's rare for your highness to ask me for help in such an urgent tone, so I naturally have to do my best. She smiled. However, many crew members are unwilling to sail in the heavy snow, so I can only gather these 13 ships. It's better than nothing. Roland exhaled a white breath. Since he learned that there were still a large number of refugees stranded in Silver City, Redwater City, and Willow Town, he sent a letter to Marjorie's Chamber of Commerce asking for help, hoping that the other party could gather a fleet to help him transport the refugees. Although 13 ships were a little too few, they could always transport the people back by 2 more trips. According to the calculation that it would take 2 weeks for a sailboat to carry 100 people in a round trip, it would take about 1.5 months to transport the 3,000 stranded people. The Golden Dragon carried by the First Army's squad could not last until then, so they had to carry food and cold-resistant clothes on this return trip. Roland did not wish for the refugees to be unable to reach their destination even though they hoped to board the ship. Thanks to lightning, Marjorie finally set the transportation fee at twice the usual price. If it were any other merchant, they would definitely think that this was a foolish transaction. Just the transportation fee alone was more than the value of the goods. The average transportation fee for 2 people was 1 gold royal. According to the current market price, one could buy several strong and high-quality slaves with that kind of money. Marjorie had also raised this question to him, but Roland still insisted on bringing this group of people back to the western region. From the moment they followed the emissary delegation onto the sailboat, they were already considered as subjects of the western region, and he had the responsibility to provide them with protection. Moreover, in Roland's eyes, the value of these refugees was far greater than that of slaves. After receiving education, training, and re-employment, the wealth they could create in their new jobs would be immeasurable. Back in the castle parlor, Roland ordered the kitchen to serve Marjorie a bowl of thick soup to ward off the cold. "Drink this, and your hands and feet will be much warmer." "Thank you for your kindness." The female merchant scooped up a spoonful and smelled it. "There seems to be white wine in it." "Yes." He smiled. "In addition, there are also pepper and honey, and the base is chicken soup." High alcohol was an excellent drink to ward off the cold at any time, and when heated together with the chicken soup, the taste became more mellow. With the addition of seasonings to cover up the irritating taste, the whole bowl of soup was fresh and slightly spicy, and people who did not drink often could easily drink it. Margaret slowly drank the thick soup and let out a long sigh. "It's really good. Every time I'm on the way to your place, I'm always full of expectations, wondering what new things you'll come up with. It's a pity that I probably won't be able to frequent your territory next year." "Are you referring to the trading opportunities?" Roland keenly captured the meaning of her words. The female merchant nodded. "Timothy has issued an order to ban saltpeter trading. Now, saltpeter is not only restricted to King's City, but also to Silver City and Redwater City. In addition to supplying it at a low price to the alchemist workshop, we can only sell it to the nobles in the city." Roland furrowed his brows. "And according to the information I heard from City Hall, he seems to be planning a complete blockade of the western region. I'm afraid that not only saltpeter, but also merchants will be blocked at the front line of Redwater City. At that time, not only Border Town, but Longsong Stronghold and Willow Town will also be affected. Although many nobles have expressed their opposition, I don't think Timothy will take back his order." She shook her head helplessly. "By next year, not only will I not be able to transport saltpeter and/or ingots here, but even the steam engine trade will probably be suspended. It seems that I've pushed him too far, otherwise he wouldn't have come up with this kind of edict that is equally harmful to the royal family." Roland couldn't help but think, in the absence of complete centralization of power, rashly interfering with the trade activities of other territories is likely to arouse the rebellious mentality of the lords and great nobles. Even if Timothy sent his own troops to guard the land and river routes, it would be easy for the local lords to eliminate them from behind, as long as he enforced this policy for a year and a half. But unfortunately, trade was the Achilles heel of Border Town. Not to mention a year, even half a year was not allowed. Saltpeter was the raw material for large-scale acid production, and before the artificial synthesis of ammonia was solved, its importance was irreplaceable. Once the supply was stopped, the 152mm artillery would become a decoration, and the replacement of the new repeating guns would be delayed. But compared to weapons, the steam engine trade was more critical. Nowadays, there weren't many golden dragons left in the treasury of City Hall. Part of the money earned was used for infrastructure construction and increasing the number of jobs, while the other part was used as salary for the townspeople. Then it was recycled through the trade of food, convenience goods, and housing, forming a cycle. This economic model required a constant injection of golden dragons into the market, at least equal to the wealth created by the people. At present, Border Town was still in a primitive state of accumulation, and there was no issuance of credit currency. Once the steam engine trade income was lost, the finance would easily fall into a situation where the salaries could not be paid, and then the economy would collapse. In any case, the interruption of funds was absolutely unacceptable. "This situation won't last long," Roland said, spreading his hands. "I believe that you will soon be able to visit this town in the western region again. No, by that time, you should see a brand new city. Marjorie was slightly surprised. Are you going to build a city here? Just after the end of the months of the demons, he laughed. In addition, I intend to open a trade route directly connected to the fjords, not through the Seawanshire or the port of Clearwater, but directly from the Western Territory to the fjords islands. I don't know if you are interested in participating. To be continued. Chapter 365. From the Western region? Marjorie asked curiously. I didn't know that there was a good harbor here that could lead to the sea. Not yet, but we can build one. Her eyes widened. Your Highness, are you serious? Of course, we should be able to start building it next spring. Roland smiled. In this era, without exception, seaports were all natural. A man-made harbor was a huge project that required the transformation of the natural landscape, which was almost impossible to achieve. But now he had the full support of Tilly. When the construction of the houses on Sleeping Island was completed, Lotus would return to the Western region again. At that time, the demonic beast disaster would recede, and it would be a suitable day to open a port. He got up and pointed to the map hanging behind him. There is a shoal in the south of Border Town. The depth of the water is ideal, and the area is also very suitable. It is enough to accommodate all the facilities needed for the port. As long as it is slightly modified and the coastal mountains are flattened, I can transport goods from the western region by land. Transform the shoal, flatten the mountains. Why do I have the illusion that these amazing things are not difficult when they come from your mouth? Marjorie said with great interest. But, do you have a merchant fleet? You should know that sea ships are very different from river sailing ships. Not yet, Roland said, spreading out his hands. That's why I hope you can participate in it. You want me to sail the ship? I'll be responsible for both transportation and sales, he added. The Western region will only provide goods. This was equivalent to the exclusive distribution rights in the fjords. With Marjorie's experience, she could naturally see the profits involved. Organizing his own caravan to sell to the fjords could naturally make more money, but Roland did not want to invest too much energy and manpower in this area. He just wanted to get new funds as soon as possible to maintain the rapid development of his territory. Once the primitive accumulation was completed, the introduction of credit currency was only a matter of time. Sure enough, the businesswoman blinked and asked excitedly, "Entrust all of it to me? If the price is reasonable." Roland nodded. If you are willing to act as an agent for the overseas trade of the Western region, we can talk about it in detail. The scope of sale is limited to the fjords, and the price must not be lower than the current selling price to the Crescent Moon Bay caravan. Of course, a steamship that can sail continuously without relying on the wind is worth the high price of those cross-sea caravans. Her tone was full of confidence. If we sell it directly to the fjord islands, I'm sure we can double the price. And we can share the extra profits, Roland said with a smile. In addition, other than the steam engine, there's also this. He clapped his hands, and the guard waiting outside the hall immediately came in with a plate. There were 4 or 5 crystal bottles on the plate, each only the size of a thumb. This is, open it and smell it. Marjorie curiously opened the cork on the top of the bottle and sniffed it. Her eyes suddenly lit up. Oh my God, you actually made perfume. I wonder how it compares to the products of the alchemist workshop in King's City. The fragrance seems to be stronger. She held the bottle and looked at it from left to right, apparently unable to put it down. Is this made by the Border Town Alchemy Workshop? Almost. Roland also picked up a bottle and put it in the palm of his hand. According to his own requirements, the perfume bottle was made of crystal glass with excellent transparency, and its shape was a standard 6-sided prism. With a slight turn of the bottle, under the light, the perfume inside would change into different shades of color, extremely beautiful. According to the sales philosophy of the later generations, exquisite packaging could greatly improve the quality of the product itself. As a hit product to open the fjord's market, he naturally had to treat it carefully. Compared to the steam engine, perfume could be described as a real low-cost product. When Evelyn realized that the spiciest white wine was also a kind of wine, high-concentration alcohol was continuously produced from her hands, and even the last step of distillation was omitted. As for roses or other flowers with unique fragrances, they were also transformed by leaf into oily products. Only 2 or 3 of them were needed to be mashed, and the strong fragrance of the flowers could fill a jar of alcohol. If you like it, these bottles are for you. He put the perfume back on the plate. Really? Marjorie laughed. Then I won't stand on ceremony. I heard that this thing can be sold for a good price in the fjords. You should know that the annual sales of perfume by the Alchemist Workshop in King's City are very limited. The supply of more than 1,000 bottles can't meet the demand. Those big merchants are especially particular about the fishy smell on their bodies, so perfume is a regular product for them. After selling it at the price of 5 golden dragons in King's City, it can be sold for 15 to 20 golden dragons in the fjords. In fact, a large part of the perfume sold to other areas will also be taken away and resold by the merchants across the sea. At this point, Marjorie paused. I don't know how many bottles of perfume your alchemy workshop can produce in a year. If the raw materials are sufficient, it should be about 10 times that of the Alchemist Workshop in King's City. Roland deliberately lowered the number. He didn't want to sell his profiteering goods like cabbages, nor did he want to earn only 4,000 or 5,000 gold coins a year. As a competitive product alongside the steam engine, he hoped that perfume could bring back an equal amount of profit. The female merchant was speechless for a while, then sighed with emotion. Your territory is really full of incredible things. So, are you willing to act as my agent to sell these goods? Of course, Your Highness, she stood up and bowed. For me, this is also a rare opportunity. After reaching a general agreement, the specific details and terms of the contract were handed over to Berev to discuss in detail. Roland returned to his office, ready to write a letter to Theo, who was lurking in King's City. Whether it was to take the initiative to overthrow Timothy or to open up a new trade route, it was a two-legged plan. He didn't want to put all his eggs in one basket. In case his attack failed, he also hoped to continue to obtain saltpeter. This way, was to produce it himself. In the letter, in addition to mentioning his own intention to attack, another point was to let Theo contact the saltpeter factories around King's City and purchase a group of saltpeter workers to send to the Western Territory. This year, the saltpeter merchants certainly didn't have a good time. While Timothy prohibited the export of saltpeter, he also forced them to sell to the Alchemist Workshop at a low price. As a result, the profits of the saltpeter factories would naturally fall again and again. Roland believed that as long as the remuneration was generous enough, it wouldn't be difficult to buy the factory along with the workers. The principle of saltpeter production wasn't complicated. Now that the population of Border Town was constantly increasing, it could also satisfy the large amount of excrement needed by the saltpeter factories. The conditions for self-production had already been met. Before defeating Timothy, it would undoubtedly be the most stable and secure point of security. Chapter 366. The snow outside the window became heavier. Snowflakes the size of fingernails fell from the sky. Looking at it, the sky above the town was full of snowflakes. Gray fairies fluttered in the wind and fell densely to the ground, merging with the white roofs and tree branches. Such a scene would make people feel cold. But the colder it was, the warmer Tilly felt. She leaned against the back of the recliner, half of her body covered by a soft blanket, and her feet were in the fire barrel. This convenient heating device was invented by Roland Wimbledon. The square wooden barrel was level with the chair, and there was a charcoal brazier in it, separated by a horizontal wooden fence. It was not like a burning bonfire, where one would easily be burned if they were too close, and would not feel much heat if they were too far away. As long as one put one's feet on the wooden fence, one could enjoy the warmth of the charcoal fire at close range, and then cover one's body with a quilt, as if it was surrounded by warmth. The heavy snow outside the window served as a foil to the coziness in the room. Probably the happiness produced by the contrast was the most impressive. It had to be said that the treatment of the witches here was completely different from a year ago. It was not difficult to understand why they did not want to leave the town, because even she herself enjoyed this moment. In addition to her, there was also Anna and Agatha in the room. This was originally Anna's bedroom. Taking advantage of the rare leisure time, Tilly would come to the door with a book and ask Anna for advice. At first, it was only the two of them, but now there was an ancient witch who had woken up from the ruins. Anna simply moved the fire barrel from the table to an empty space in the room, and asked Roland to add 2 more reclining chairs. The three of them sat around the fire barrel, their feet leaning against each other, and together they studied the new knowledge that would open their eyes to a whole new world. Of course, most of the time it was just them asking questions, and Anna answering. It's hard to believe that such a book was written by a mortal. Agatha closed Natural Science Theoretical Foundation, and took a deep breath. The more I read, the more I feel that the world seems to be like this. There is a hidden rule in all the chaos, and everything follows the same rule. Even if he was born in Tequila, the Union will certainly include him. Maybe he will have the same status as a senior witch. At first, she had many doubts about the contents of the book, but with Anna's careful answers, Agatha's attitude towards Roland had changed dramatically. However, Tilly believed that this change was only for Roland. The other mortals were probably still stupid in their eyes. Thinking of this, she could not help but sigh. Only she knew that this knowledge did not belong to Roland Wimbledon, but to someone else, someone who had suddenly appeared in her mind. After spending the past few days with Sylvie, Tilly basically confirmed this statement. But in this way, proving that he was still himself was an impossible task. And the most suspicious point was that he really didn't know where these memories came from, and who they belonged to. It was hard to believe that one's memories could be completely separated from one's life. At the very least, he couldn't do this. As long as he recalled the knowledge taught by the court tutor in his mind, relevant scenes of that time would always flash before his eyes. Where did he learn all this knowledge from? Agatha sighed. I thought the mortal's research had reached such a depth, but after a few days of observation, it seems that there is not much difference from 400 years ago, even a little behind. I don't know, Tilly shrugged. Anyway, he couldn't have learned it from the palace. What kind of person was he before? This question made Anna also raise her head. Before. Tilly pondered for a moment. Arrogant and timid, doing things his own way, ignorant and incompetent, with a terrible personality. Probably the only good thing about him is that he didn't use his identity as a prince to do anything evil. Well, the level of mortals. No, among mortals, he is also a terrible guy, she complained. Even though he suddenly improved after coming here, it is still hard to figure out what he is thinking. He keeps everything bottled up in his stomach, and wants others to believe him. How is that possible? The room suddenly became quiet. What's wrong? Tilly felt that the gazes of the two were a little strange. No. Nothing. Anna covered her mouth and laughed. This is the first time I heard you say this. Damn it, she realized that she had said too much. This kind of complaint should not come from the mouth of an ally. Perhaps she had been too relaxed recently. I mean. It's okay, His Highness doesn't care about this kind of thing. Anna shook her head and smiled. Maybe he also has his own difficulties. Roland. Tilly hesitated for a moment. Didn't he mention this to you? No, Anna said indifferently. I didn't ask. If he wanted to say it, he would have said it. She sighed in her heart. For him, from the first time he met the prince, he should be the changed Roland, so it was meaningless to think about this problem. From what you said, he is a completely different person from before? Agatha asked with great interest. There is a saying in the Quest Society that the more extraordinary a person is, the more he will have different quirks from ordinary people. Maybe this kind of change is a normal phenomenon. When Roland was in the palace, Did he howl at the moon or stare at the wall for a long time? What kind of quirks are these? Tilly shook her head helplessly. In the past, he was no different from ordinary people, except that he was a little unruly. But I also heard people mention that he once shouted in public that he wanted to marry a witch. It was probably because of these words that Gerald and Timothy always tormented him in the name of purifying the devil's minions. Moreover, my father also didn't like this kind of behavior, so his character became more and more unruly. Because he wanted to marry a witch and was discriminated against. Agatha curled her lips. This is a great dream in tequila. Of course, there are very few people who succeed. Most witches don't want to live with only one man for the rest of their lives. But we are different from 400 years ago. If he married a witch, he wouldn't have children to inherit everything from him. How could father have a good impression of this idea? Tilly sighed. But it has been more than 10 years. He should have long forgotten the stupid words he said. Really? Anna suddenly said, but he is still willing to marry a witch. Well, does he remember? Wait. Tilly couldn't help but stare. You mean now? Yes. She smiled gently. His Highness Roland said it himself. Tilly suddenly froze in place. Chapter 367. Perrault yawned and sat up from the bed. His upper body immediately felt a chill. If he could, he wished to stay under the covers. Not only was it warm, but he also had Shirley's company. Don't you want to sleep a little longer? The woman beside him turned over and murmured sleepily, It's still early, isn't it? He leaned over and kissed her forehead. Shirley's brown hair was soft and curly, her skin was as smooth as a baby's, and she had a pair of adorable big eyes. It was in the long opera house that he had first met her. Almost as soon as he saw her, he had been attracted by her eyes. It should be noon soon. I have to go downstairs to see if there are any official matters to attend to, Perrault said in a low voice. If you don't want to get up, you can continue sleeping. I'll ask the servants to send lunch to the bedroom later. But I want you to accompany me. Shirley stretched her arms over and hugged his waist. It's snowing outside anyway. What official matters can there be? What she said was true. Ever since the months of demons arrived, the entire city had suddenly quietened down. The opening of the theater became once a week, the merchants in the market all left, and the taverns closed their doors. If one were to walk on the streets during the day, one would even think that this was an empty city. So, should I sleep a little longer? After pursuing Shirley for nearly a year, he finally got what he wanted. Perrault was a little reluctant to leave. The pleasure of the night before had exhausted him, and now he was full of energy again. After lunch, perhaps he could have another round of lovemaking. Just then, there was a knock on the bedroom door. Sir Perrault, there's a blue letter. He was startled, then immediately rolled over and got off the bed. He picked up the robe that had been thrown on the ground and put it on. I'll be right there. Sir. Shirley said in a low voice. Wait for me. Perrault hurriedly fastened his belt and left the bedroom. After a while, he returned to the room and climbed under the covers again. There was a letter wrapped in a blue envelope in his hand. What's this? Who wrote it to you? The woman had basically woken up. She yawned and sat up to lean against Perrault. From Border Town, the latter replied. It should be a personal letter from His Highness. He opened the envelope and took out the letter. He quickly scanned the contents and frowned. His Highness asked me to go to Border Town. Now? Shirley said in surprise. You're going in this weather? Well, it's probably something urgent. Petrov sighed. I'll pack up and leave in the afternoon. Go home first. I'll find you when I'm back. He couldn't help but remember a year ago, when he had braved the wind and snow to take a boat to Border Town to bring Duke Ryan's warning to Longsong Stronghold. But now, The reason he had to go to the barren land was because of a letter from the town lord. Petrov couldn't help but lament the fickleness of fate. "Can't you just pretend you didn't see it?" she said unhappily. "Even if he captured Longsong's stronghold, you're the real ruler of the stronghold. Even if it's the king's order, you don't have to carry it out immediately, do you? If it were the duke, he would have done so." But Perrault knew Prince Roland's temperament well. He touched the prince's head dotingly. "That's different. The king may not be able to control the western region, but His Highness Roland can. He's not only the lord of Border Town, but also the master of the entire western region." After entering the months of demons, Longsong's stronghold indeed did not have too many official affairs to handle. Petrov simply assigned some tasks to his subordinates, and conveniently brought his father, Earl Hull, to the castle to assume command, before leaving the castle. Unlike the last time when he only had one assistant with him, this time he rode on the Duke's personal ship, the Lionheart. He brought along more than 10 servants and apprentices, as well as 2 family knights. It could be said to be a formidable force. Just as he passed through the streets of the outer city and headed for the stronghold pier, a noise from the corner of the street attracted Perrault's attention. A dozen or so people were gathered in a circle, as if they were watching something. Judging from their attire, they seemed to be commoners. They were probably nearby residents who were attracted by the noise. Occasionally, someone in the circle would say something like, "Devil! Hang her," such a shrill roar. Perrault thought of something and said to the knight beside him, "Go and have a look. If it's just an ordinary dispute, tell them to go back to their houses." "Yes, my lord." The knight pushed through the crowd, walked to the center, and pulled out his sword. The crowd quickly dispersed. He finally brought back a woman and 2 children, one of whom had a hemp rope tied around his neck. "What's going on?" "My lord," the woman threw herself at Perrault's feet. "Kill her quickly. She's degenerated into a witch." The word surprised Perrault. "A witch?" Roland shifted his gaze to the other 2. The taller boy immediately stood in front of the girl, looking as if he was ready to pounce on her at any time. However, his face was bruised, and it was obvious that he had been beaten badly. "She's not the devil's minion at all. It's shown in the play that there are good and bad witches. What right do you have to punish her? Are you sure she's a witch?" Perrault ignored the boy and continued to ask the woman. "Yes, my lord. Don't be fooled by the plays in the plays. If the church was still here, they wouldn't be able to tolerate their nonsense on the stage. This animal is also a little devil. I'm punishing her on behalf of the church. My lord, please strangle her to death so that the breath of hell won't spread to Longsong City." "Get to the point," he scolded. After the woman's incessant nagging, Perrault finally figured out the cause and effect. After the church was burned down by Timothy, she and some other believers organized themselves and continued to preach and pray in the outer city. They were waiting for the holy city of Hermes to send a new priest to rebuild the church in the western region. As for the situation this time, it was a complete coincidence that the woman saw the girl using her ability to remove snow from the roofs of the residence. During her narration, the woman repeatedly complained about the absurdity of the primary education and the theater's performance, which made the nearby onlookers only dare to grab the boy, but few were willing to help her hang the abominable devil. In the past, her body should have been hung under the roof beams. These hateful words made Perrault's eyebrows twitch. "Take her back and interrogate her well," he commanded the knight, "and you shall remain in the fortress this time, and when I return, I hope to find all the cultists connected with her in prison." "What? No. My lord, how can you do this?" Before the woman could finish her words, the knight slapped her several times in the stomach. "Are you really a witch?" Then Perrault looked at the frightened little girl and said, "Show me." The little girl knelt on the ground and did not respond. Perrault shook his head, raised his voice and repeated, "If you can prove that you're a real witch, I can let you go." After a while, the girl timidly put her hands into the snow. Soon, The snow that was nearly a palm thick gradually turned into flowing ice water. I see. Perrault nodded and said, "Come with me." "Go?" The girl looked up and asked, "Where to?" "A place suitable for witches to live." He signaled the servant to pick up the girl and continued to move toward the pier. "Put her down, you liar. You promised to let her leave." The boy wanted to rush forward, but he was stopped by a few other servants. His shouts gradually faded into the back of his head. "You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.